Welcome to the Wyoming Military Department Suicide Prevention Symposium, September 10th, 2020. We are broadcasting live at the Luke Reiner Auditorium here at the Cheyenne, Wyoming Joint Forces Auditorium here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. If you have any questions during this broadcast, please don't hesitate to contact us live on via Facebook comments, or you're welcome to email us your questions at the Wyoming ARNG Suicide Prevention at gmail.com. I am Kimberly Dreyer, the Wyoming Army Suicide Prevention Coordinator, and I will be your host for today's event. If at any time you are having any suicidal thoughts or struggles, please don't hesitate to call us on the number below the screen. And now, without further ado, Chaplain Chris Lehman from the 153rd Air National Guard, Chaplain. Sir?
Good morning. I invite you to join me in a word of prayer if you wish. Gracious Father, we thank you for this day and for the opportunity to raise awareness and combat a devastatingly serious issue in society, and specifically among those who serve or who have served this great country. Help all of us connect with those hurting. Protect them in dire times, even from their own hand, and do more than provide resources. Lord, help us all be people that are willing to meet our brothers and sisters in arms right where they are in the toughest moments of life and journey with them on the path of healing. God, we thank you for the thousands who have reached out for help, survived, and thrived in their military career. Spend us, Lord. Make those divine appointments for us, for those suffering in silence. Father, we thank you for the helpers who have put this symposium together and for their expectant hearts for the fullest of effectiveness. Empower the speakers today. We are grateful for their courage to share painful and difficult stories with the aim of helping others. For those we have lost, we ask for continued comfort for their friends and for their families. Father God, protect us. Fill us with truth. Be with us. Bless our time together. We ask this in the name above all names. Amen.
Members of the Wyoming Military Department serve as a sword and shield for our state and our nation. Now more than ever, it is time to acknowledge your strengths, your accomplishments, and your bravery in staying resilient and ready when we need you the most. September is National Suicide Prevention Month. Members of the Wyoming Military Department serve as a sword and shield for our state and our nation. Now more than ever, it is time to acknowledge your strengths, your accomplishments, and your bravery in staying resilient and ready when we need you the most. September is National Suicide Prevention Month. However, recognizing the warning signs and risk factors of suicide is a year-round effort. If you think a fellow soldier, airman, or coworker might be struggling, ask how they are doing. Care for them by listening to what they have to say. Finally, if needed, escort them to someone who can help. Seeking help is a sign of strength. This year's Suicide Prevention Month slogan, Connect to Protect, highlights the important role that connections to family, friends, the community, and resources can play in preventing suicide as important partners and allies in our suicide prevention efforts. Every suicide is a tragic loss to our nation and to those impacted. In some cases, we may never know why the service member or veteran took their life. Suicide is the culmination of a complex set of factors. Have the courage to reach out for help when it's needed. You can call the Wyoming Military Department Suicide Prevention Hotline at 307-369-3011 or the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. You are not alone, and people want to hear from you and help. The men and women of the Wyoming Military Department are our strength. Without strength, our sword will break and our shield will buckle. Together, we will work to ensure that will not happen. Promoting individual readiness, healthy behavior, And making our units and our organization a connected community is an all-hands effort. We have help and resources available to each of you. You don't have to experience this alone. Suicide is not an option. Remember, there is help, there is hope, and you are not alone.
Is that better?
All right, you can go. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Timothy Shepard, Executive Director of the Wyoming Veterans Commission, the Warrior Soldier's Story.
Thank you, Kimberly. Good morning, everyone. I am Tim Shepard, and I'm presently the Executive Director for the Wyoming Veterans Commission. Prior to that, I served in the United States Army and Army National Guard for 40 years. It was a great career, loved it, but in 2011, I was in a what I'll describe as a pretty horrific bicycle accident. And just to give you some context, I broke 7 ribs, 4 of them in half, basically punched a hole in my side, tore my diaphragm, and collapsed my left lung and broke my back in 2 places. So it was definitely significant. And I will tell you, it damn near killed me. Fortunately, it didn't kill me, and I'm here today, but I think that the experience was really, I say that damn near killed me, but I'll say it twice, because the accident itself almost did, but then the recovery ended up being even harder than the accident. And because of the extent of my injuries, I was placed on just massive doses of painkillers and ibuprofen. And the result of the ibuprofen, the massive doses that I had of that, I now have stage 3 kidney disease, which isn't great, but I work hard to maintain my physical conditioning, and it really helps. So the other part, though, was the painkillers and the opioids. At one point, I was on fentanyl patches along with a dose of naproxen once every 4 hours, and spaced in between that another opioid every 2 hours. I was taking some form of opioid in addition to the fentanyl patch. Well, after about a year of that, different doses, different times, it really got to me mentally, and it was a downward spiral that really went pretty fast. And so, at one point, what I found was I became an insomniac, and that led to a lot of problems for me, because I lost what I'll call my toughness, and I became very vulnerable. And eventually I got to the point where I really felt hopeless, and I felt like I was living in a pit, and that pit kept getting deeper and darker. And the one thing that I held on to was hope, and that somewhere, somehow, I was going to get through that. That was the good side. The bad side was, there is a way out of this. It's not a good one, but there is a way. And that way, it's hard to even say, was suicide. And it became a matter of how much could I take? How much of the mental stress, the mental strain, and then just the physical pain I mean, physically, it was overwhelming. And a lot of that came from the insomnia, but a lot of it also just came from, it was like having the flu every day, all day. So that's the bad part. I will tell you, it got so bad that at one point I voluntarily went to the inpatient unit at the hospital. I think that's where I started to turn. Could somebody hand me my water? I'm really having a hard time. Anyway, that's where I think it started to turn. And there's a gentleman here today, thank you very much. There's a gentleman here today, Dr. Tom, who I met in group therapy. And I'll say that what he talked about resonated with me and gave me, I'll call it a rope, and helped me start getting out of that pit. The other thing that was really important to me was medication. So obviously the opiates were a medication that wasn't helping me, but through my psychiatrist at CRMC East and a lot of intensive therapy, I did find myself getting stronger and able to start to climb out of that pit. I did want to, there are some words that really resonated with me on what it was like to be in that pit, and I wanted to share them with you so I didn't forget them. I wrote them down. One thing that was so hard was the loneliness. I really did feel like I was all alone, and I have a lot of great family and great friends, but what I found was that I pushed them away. And even I have 7 kids, and of those 7 kids, for some reason, I really felt it with one of my daughters, and it was incredibly hard because I wanted to reach out to her, but for some reason I felt I couldn't, and so I didn't, and I felt like there was a wall between us. So it was very lonely. And then again, the pit was very dark. The sleeplessness was incredible. And another one that I think was directly related to the opiates was anxiety. Just this constant presence of something really bad's going to happen, and not being able to get away from it. And really, I knew it at the time. It was me. I was afraid of me and what I might do. So the anxiety was very, very hard. I talked about how painful it was, both mentally and physically. And even to stand here today, and I know I shouldn't be, but it's really embarrassing, because I felt so weak, and just what we believe as a society and as a people and in the military culture, this was really contrary to my fellow soldiers, that I would get myself, and I felt like I got myself into this predicament. It was very unique, I thought, that I felt like I was a snowflake, that sometimes things would resonate with me, other times they wouldn't, and so it was very unique. Again, I felt weak. I really felt the stigma of what this was like. And the last one that I still fear this, and that's that pit. Because it was so dark, it was so lonely, it was terrifying in there. And again, what I was most afraid of was myself. Okay, so that's enough about that. So what brings me out? I think most importantly was a lot of therapy, a lot of counseling, medication, family, faith. The most important thing, though, was that thing called hope, and that I never lost it completely. I got to points where I would say, I'm pretty close to hopeless here. But then through a therapy or whatever, I would come out of it a little bit. The other thing I wanted to talk about was that this really became a life-changing event, and for the therapy to work, I had to go through a lot of things that happened in my life, not just the accident. Because a lot of other things were coming up, and it was like, well, how do you get past this, and how do you get past that? And it was through some really, really gifted clinicians helping me, and me then helping myself. Mindfulness was a big part of it. I used a lot of techniques that were given to me through therapy of mindfulness and recognizing. One of the main things I had to recognize was those triggers that could potentially put me back in the pit, and that I didn't allow that to happen. That I would stop myself and say, okay, right now all you're going to do is think about walking into the building and what it's like to walk into the building, and just stay focused on the moment. And that really helped me. I can tell you that today I don't feel like I would fall in the pit. Today I feel like I'm much stronger, and I have the tools that help me. And again, a big part of that is friends and family, and I really count on them. But I also count on my psychiatrist. I count on my therapist, who I see now every 2 weeks, and it's very healing for me to continue to do that. I actually do what's called EMDR with my therapist, and that's been life-changing for me. So that's really what I have, Kimberly, unless there are questions for me or other comments.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your service, sir. Thank you.
Oh yeah, you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
got no mic, so forward back.
And now, Mr. Thomas D. Kirk, Capital Counseling, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Sir.
Thank you very much. I want to start by saying thank you for allowing me to come today and be a part of this process. And thank you all that are participating and watching and being involved here live for your service. It's greatly appreciated. I come from a military family, and so it means a ton for me to be involved with these kinds of things, and I appreciate being asked, given the opportunity to do this. I'd kind of like to probably start out and tell you just a tad bit about myself. I've been a practice in therapy and psychology and forensic psychology and stuff for an extended period of time, probably 35 years. I worked out of the emergency room here locally in town for 25 years and did all the psych emergencies. And fortunately, unfortunately, I've been exposed to a multitude of kind of, sad and conflicting kinds of situations, and way too many people that I've assessed in my career that have been suicidal and helpless, hopeless kinds of dynamics. Actually, out of the emergency room, unfortunately, I've seen a lot, probably 10,000, I guesstimated the other day, attempts, which is, a kind of disturbing number for just one individual to have that much exposure over that period of time. And it's kind of a sad deal. I still deal with things at a pretty consistent level in my private practice. I also do evaluations at the jail, and I still work at the hospital as well. And so, but that being said, some of the dynamics of that, and I wanted to share a little bit today of being able to involve some of the situations and maybe some of the helpful components in terms of conflict resolution. And I wanted to kind of break it up in terms of some of the aspects and some of the defining features involved with the mental health component of that and kind of what mental health means, as opposed to, maybe the generic kind of component of it. Conflict in itself, I think, is an unavoidable dynamic. It is part of the human condition. I think any time that we have any type of relationships and interpersonal relationships or personal types of situations, we as human beings, it's part of the situation to just have conflict because we're different types of people. That being said, I think that it kind of is broken down into kind of components. Some of us thrive on a certain amount of conflict. Some of us, perform and function better under certain levels of conflict. Believe it or not, neurophysiologically, we need some kind of conflict. We need levels of anxiety and things like that to actually stimulate neurotransmissions and components in the brain and some of those things. But not all conflict has to be a bad thing. And I'll kind of get into some of this in just a little bit in terms of, as Mr. Shepard had kind of identified, there's a kind of a catch-all term now that's referred to as mindfulness. It's part of the cognitive behavioral dynamic of dealing therapeutic with it, and it has found to be extremely helpful, and I'll talk about some of the specifics of that a little bit. But conflict, like I said, occurs in some aspects, day to day to day. And one of the things that people may not always be aware of in terms of dealing with conflict is that conflict usually we bring it has its origins and it has its history, even on the initiation of any kind of a conflict that we may be occurring. We bring attitudes and beliefs and things into the situation, and that it's kind of sets the presence or the tone of how we are going to deal with issues in our life. Our own attitude, our own mental health, our own awareness, and mindfulness, if you will, has a large impact in terms of how we resolve conflict. Some of it has been learned over a period of time. We are products of our environment from the time that we're young. We have learned to deal with conflict with familiar situations to as we go through early adolescent and adult life to find alternate aspects of dealing with conflict. But that being said, I think that there are certain components, as I've kind of mentioned here, healthy conflict that we try to keep mindful in this situation, that we want to, what I refer to as kind of keep your eye on the prize. And what I mean by that is that we try to take the other person's consideration, their attitudes, their thoughts, their feelings, their attributes as a human being into consideration as part of dealing with things, and that it is not all about winning. It is more about trying to cause resolve and to assist with the process of being effective for everybody concerned. Unfortunately, we have these things that occur within us psychologically, and one of them is that we all are kind of driven by an ego, and that ego sometimes prevents us from being able to be so much maybe resolution focused as it is more that we want to get into kind of a win situation. Especially if it starts pushing our buttons in terms of, personally or, has a kind of an emotionally charged dynamic. And so, and I'll share a little bit more of that in just a little bit about kind of what that means and the drawback of being so center focused kind of thing. As I had kind of mentioned in one of my slides here, the unhealthy conflict is more like we get into a situation where it's a kind of a battle to be won, okay? We have a mission there, and sometimes we lose track of the dynamic of trying to resolve conflict. It ends up being that we are motivated by a kind of a personalization of it. We take ownership of it, and it becomes like, I want to win this situation, all right? And somehow the thought is that if I don't resolve this conflict in my favor, that it is going to be, that it somehow is going to be an identifying factor of myself, that I am going to be less than. Tim had talked about a weakness that people experience and feel, that as they are in times of strife and difficulties, that somehow I'm not being able to do this appropriately, and so I am somehow less than of a person or something, which is really inaccurate. But the thought and the presence is still there, especially if those things are really defining factors of kind of how and who we are. So I want to share just a little bit too of just kind of the definition of mental health as far as I'm concerned. Mental health to me is more than just kind of a state of mind. I think it has more of a global outreaching kind of a definition and term for me. And mental health is not only the state of my well-being, but also those of the people around me, the community and things. It's a defining factor of kind of how and who we are, but it is also a little bit more than that. It is also something that maybe it would hopefully to kind of resonate some thoughts of what needs to be done to maintain kind of the mental health. Not only within myself, but the community. And I think that it's an extremely important dynamic when we look at resolving any kind of conflict in our life, is to take into consideration other people's awareness and their mental health as well. It's not just kind of a self-serving component, but it's also a situation where I think it's really important to take into consideration that maybe somebody else is struggling. Maybe they have their own kinds of things that are going on, and we have to take that as part of our understanding and how we're going to address any kind of conflict that we move forward with. So I think that that's really important things. I think that I kind of identified some of the resolution skills here, and the styles are not so much important, as that I think that the outcomes are the important. I had mentioned here the competitive style, the capability of resolving some conflict, and the competitive style is more what I had mentioned earlier, that it's more about me, it's a winning for me, even if it's at the expense of somebody else, which actually kind of will constitute more kind of a conflict when we don't take the other person's stuff into consideration. I think that it's really important, if we are self-serving in these situations, that sometimes it increases the conflicts pretty significantly. The compromise style, and that's where it is that we have the availability to actually, compromise in this situation, and that we're willing to give consideration to allow somebody else's point of view and their needs and wants to be present, and maybe not even so much to the point that it is going to resolve that in an effective way that I think is beneficial for me, but it may be that I'm considering that their stuff is as important as my stuff, okay? And I think that that's, an important kind of a thing to look at. Again, some people have some challenges with that. They may find it easier to, say, I am not going to, it's not going to be beneficial for me in this situation at all, but it's easier just to kind of give in and just let this situation occur, or something along those lines. And so I will let them win because I'm okay enough with me and my sense of self that I can actually allow somebody, to kind of be okay with them. And I don't place the same value, if you will, on their ability to be able to express themselves, and we can resolve this conflict, and I can still be okay in this situation. Many of us, I will tell you, sometimes have a very difficult and a challenging time with this kind of a dynamic. We place value on things, and when we do that, I mean that emotionally, psychologically, in all kinds of ways. And when we do that, sometimes the interpretation of the value becomes a defining moment for us. If I give somebody the availability and the power to, kind of define me and say, well, if I can give into this situation, or I give them the power, then, they will think of me in a better way, or it will resolve this situation, and I will be seen in a different light. I can be encouraged from that, or something along those lines. That kind of thinking, I think, is effective for us, but one of the challenges lies is when we give the people the power in that situation for us to be okay, the equal and opposite of that also occurs, which is, all right, if I have somebody and compromise and give them the power to say that's going to define me, and oh gosh, I'm such a good guy for being able to resolve this for you in this way, well then they also have the power to take it away. And what I mean by that is if I allow somebody, to have those decisions, okay, and it defines me in a positive way, well then I also have to remember I can still do the same thing, and those people could potentially change their mind, and then they could reject me, and now they have the power to take it away. So we have to be mindful again of the opportunity of how we're going to resolve things, and taking into consideration the effect that that's not only going to have on myself, each of us, but also the people that are involved with potentially resolving this. So the compromising light, these are situations when it's not necessarily, just enough to allow somebody to, you know, you kind of give in, if you will, and allow yourself to kind of compromise in this situation. But there's kind of a hidden agenda behind that, and that situation is that you have to continue to make yourself available and utilize the situation, that it's just backing off maybe a little bit, and that you're going to, in this particular level of conflict, that you're still taking your stuff into consideration, but you're trying to be flexible enough that it ends up being a win-win situation, as opposed to I lose, you win, or I win and you completely lose. So the style collaboration, I really think, is probably one of the most effective. And this is a situation where we are working together. I refer to it as keeping your eyes on the prize again, okay? And that it's not the personalization between us that is going on, okay? It is more of a situation that we are focused on an outcome, all right? I'm taking responsibility and I'm taking ownership for my half of the resolution, and the hope is that I'm facilitating and you know, kind of perpetuating the opportunity for you at the other end of this to take ownership for your part, and that we don't get into the personalizations conflict that increases it. We actually are focusing on the availability of an outcome, okay, that is beneficial for all people concerned. And those are usually more beneficial. I remember when I was growing up, my parents had a Friday ritual thing that they would do. And my dad would come home from work and he would ask my mom a question. He would do this thing where he would say, would you like to go out to eat tonight? And my mother would say things like, oh yeah, that'd be great, that'd be really good. And he says, well, where would you like to go? And my mom would say, oh, I don't care. It doesn't matter, anywhere's fine. And my dad would say, okay, well, you know, gosh, we haven't been to that Italian place for X period of time. And my mom goes, you know, I don't want Italian food today. And my dad, I could already see the veins popping out in his neck. And so he would kind of, you know, get a little charged, but he would maintain a little bit. And then he goes, well, you know, there's a new Chinese place. And my mom says, nah, I really don't feel like Chinese. And my dad would say, you always do this. You always do this, okay? I ask you where you want to go. You say you don't care, but you really do care. Why don't you just say where you want to go? And then my mom would utilize that as a situation to kind of throw what I call a grenade at my dad. And she says, well, what difference is it going to make? Because you're going to do what you want to do anyway. And so they would go into this thing and they would utilize it. And this is what I talk about, this history in these conflicts, okay? They would utilize that as a springboard opportunity to kind of throw emotional grenades and unresolved issues at one another. They forgot to focus on going someplace to eat and the resolution of that. It ended up being an opportunity for personalizations that occur. There was no collaboration that happened to that. And I would sit back there and I would watch them do this, and I was just fascinated at that, even at an early age, going, what? I mean, this was just like an everyday thing, you know, every Friday thing. And I was like, and so finally there was one point in my life, I was over there and they were doing this, and I said, why don't you pick one Friday and you pick the next Friday? And that was an astounding thing for my parents to grasp. That was like an amazing process for them. They were like, why would we do that? And I'm like, you know, you're focusing on going out to eat. It might be a collaborative effort, you know, that'd be cool. You know, you don't have to get into these, you know, grenade throwing situations. You can just, you know, focus on doing something like that. Avoidance, this is a situation that I will tell you I see a lot with people, all right? And it is just easier because they have a projected identification, and what I mean by that is they say, I'm going to avoid this conflict because I already know what the outcome is going to be. I'm not going to get my needs met in it, I know if I say something, they're not going to listen to me. It's going to be a situation where, okay, we are things are not going to change. And so what's going to happen is that if I just don't involve myself in it, then I kind of forfeit the opportunity over to you. Unfortunately, just as I had shared with you prior to this in the collaborative effort, it leads to resentments. It leads to building that history that you bring with you in terms of other kinds of conflicts, which I think ends up being really a negative thing. The other part about that is, from the mindful standpoint, it reinforces in us, okay, that our stuff is not important. We feel like, well, there's no point in me saying something, there's no point in me presenting something to you or making my opinion, because it's not going to change anything. You're not going to change your mind. It's not going to change your behaviors. And so I am just going to keep that to myself. Well, then that reinforces psychologically and emotionally with us that our stuff is not important, okay? Because it's not important to make an impact on that person, and it must not be important to me because I'm not doing anything about it anyway, okay? Because I can't. I'm stuck with this situation. It's not changing anything. And unfortunately, those are the kinds of things that, again, builds that history that we take with us in terms of conflict. When we get into situations with, you know, people in life of authority or whatever, then we sit there and say, well, see, now it's a defining factor for me. This is how I think about myself, and when I get myself in these situations, my stuff is not important. And that's really is very, very inaccurate, okay? All right, the basic principle, I have some skills here, and I think that there's 4 things that I think are really important. And one of them is that I think it's vitally important in conflict resolution to separate the person from the behavior, okay, or the outcome. As I had shared with you the experience with my parents, they personalized it. They took ownership of the conflict. And so they identified the individual in that situation, and that person became the conflict, okay? And I think that that is, you know, a significant mistake. I was working with a family, a young person that I was seeing just a couple of weeks ago, and he had come in for some suicidal thoughts, and his mother came with him, and she identified him as kind of he was a good kid, she loved him, but for most of the time she identified him as kind of an SOB. And she called him that. And I said, you help me understand here, he's your son, but you call him an SOB, you know? And she says, well, you know, he acts that way most of the time. And I said, but you're identifying him and labeling him as that. And so he thinks that that's who he is and what he is. Why wouldn't he be that way? I said, you have to separate him from his behavior. Okay? Well, I do care about him, I just don't like the way he acts. And I said, you can focus on that, but you have to be able to identify him as somebody that you care about. And I said, because what you're doing at this point in time, you're using that identification of him as a filter that you're looking through, okay, that he's this SOB, his behavior, and so you're identifying him as an individual as that. And I said, that is really going to be challenging for him, you know, to try to resolve anything for you. And so she was kind of able to see that, and he was able to hear that a little bit, which was, you know, pretty helpful. I think that it's really important, again, I keep reiterating to kind of keep your eyes on the prize of focusing on the interest, not the specifics and the, you know, necessarily the outcomes of everything, the motivations, the, you know, all the personalizations and the things that are putting the person behind it. It's like, you know, are we trying to read kind of between the lines and what is going on with this person, as opposed to, you know, what do we want as the outcome? I think that it's extremely important to continue to be mindful of what it is, be present about what it is that we are seeking in this situation. You know, not what the hidden agenda is or any of those kinds of dynamics. I think that that brings all of those personalizations into things, and I think it makes it very much more difficult to address. Oops. All right, and the third thing is I think that it's important to kind of brainstorm, create opportunities, outcomes, you know, stop and increase choices. This is the difference between, all right, having somebody where you can sit there and react to situations, or you can respond. A reaction is a situation where I don't have any choice. You know, it's an opportunity. It's like the domino effect. Something happens and I just have to react to it. But responding is, you know, we can come up with choices. I can choose to do something else in a time of need, in a time of conflict. And I think that the way to achieve that is I think that we have to kind of stop, you know, the process. Again, focus on what we're trying to achieve here, all right? And kind of work with the person to kind of create opportunities, okay? To create things that would be beneficial, to create choices. Many times people that are struggling, okay, they don't feel that they have any choices. They don't feel like they have any opportunities. But being able to provide and question that. Part of the therapy that I do is referred to as cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is just challenging the thinking process. It's just like, you may not be aware of things, okay? But if we stop and collaboratively put some things together, it may be beneficial for an outcome, okay? Well, I wasn't even aware of those kinds of things, okay? I also state, you know, the objective criteria. I think that it's really important as, you know, instead of subjectively, just be objectively, be fair, you know, that there is resolution here, okay? That there are things that are, you know, kind of globally that may be beneficial instead of focusing on specific kinds of ideals or you know, thoughts or behaviors or some of those kinds of things. So, oops. So, the basic skills for conflict resolution are, you know, the mindful aspects of things. And when I talk about mindful, all right, mindful for me is, it has a lot of different things. The acronym for mindfulness that has been present over probably the last 10 years, you know, comes from a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it really is helpful. I wanted to share one form of things that I do for mindfulness, and I refer to it as thinking with your feet, okay? I know that sounds really kind of bizarre, but if you think of mindfulness as kind of a grounding technique to bring you to the present, to, you know, keep you focused on the here and the now kind of a dynamic, I refer to a technique that I utilize is called thinking with your feet. And I think of, all right, where are my feet at any given point in time? Okay, they're right here, right now. And one foot, okay, is the emotive side, okay, the feeling side of my process, all right? And the other foot potentially is the rational cognitive side. And so what I want to do is take the best opportunity out of both of those. What's my best thinking and feeling? What's my best, you know, emotional aspect and things like that? Put that together, allow me to be present in it and stop, be aware, and then be able to address it. And so I use this technique a lot with people, all right, in their availability of just being present and problem solving, which is, don't go into things that you already kind of know and go in and take this, you know, your resolution with things that you have learned that haven't been effective for you. Just stop and do something else, okay? Learn to do something else. Be present in your thinking, all right? The here and the now. Focus on what is available, all right? It allows you to kind of stop, think, you know, and just kind of observe some things that are potentially different. So I think that without those kinds of things, being present, having empathy, being awareness, focusing again on the kind of the outcome, you know, allowing the opportunity and having your understanding that other people have issues, they have lots of things that are potentially going on, trying to resolve conflict without having to take ownership about everything except your own part of the process. I think that it really helps in terms of resolving any kinds of these conflicts. I think that, you know, if you go into situations and you have a mindset that you're wanting to have, you know, some type of peaceful resolution in these situations, it's much more beneficial. I try to express to people, would you rather be right in a situation or would you rather be happy? And I think that, you know, sometimes we get caught up in that correctness is somehow affirming to us that if I'm right, that sometimes I'm happier. But I think it's much more beneficial, you know, to say, I'd rather be happy, and so what is it going to take for both of us to kind of be in that situation? So, again, the ability to kind of see other people's points of views. I need to go back to mental health for a second. Those availabilities of doing that is also creating your own, you know, increased mental health and mental awareness. I think that that's vitally important. I think that, you know, my philosophy in things, how I live my life, I don't really watch a whole lot of the news. I don't read a whole lot. I don't watch a whole lot of TV shows or movies or anything like that, unless I think that they are going to be somehow a contributing factor to my well-being. Okay? And what I mean by that is, my philosophy is this: if things are not contributing to my well-being, then they're contaminating it. All right? And so I want to go increasing my mental hygiene, my mental awareness, by improving things that are going to be helpful to me, not harmful to me. And if I can do that for myself, why wouldn't I want to portray that to other people that I'm having issues with in my life? Wouldn't I want the best things for them as well? Okay? And being conflictual with them is not being contributory to me. And so I try to think of myself that way. I don't want to put myself in any situation that it's not going to at least improve my well-being. You know, and that is my mental health. So I think that it's, you know, real important to, you know, utilize what we have available to us, you know, learn about things, you know, be aware of the other person's circumstances, try to increase that, find something out about them, try to reach a place that we have some neutralization and a, you know, a middle ground to be able to resolve things. I think that that's vitally important to do that. I think that it's important that we increase, you know, the availability to communicate. Most of us, truthfully, you know, we may see ourselves as fairly decent communicators, but most of us, I mean, even in the schools, you know, today, they really don't teach us how to communicate, you know. We spend a lot of time talking, but we don't really communicate. We don't do a whole lot of active listening and problem solving and understanding and empathetic kinds of things. So I think that that's, it's really important to be able to do that. I think that it's, thinking outside the box is hugely important. And I think that it's probably, you know, brainstorming, as I had mentioned before, trying to resolve conflict. Instead of it's my way or your way, I think that if we could stop, again, keep our eyes on the prize, hey, here's what's going on. You know, what else can we do? What other options do we have here? You know, what kinds of things can you bring to the table? What can I bring to the table? How are we going to be able to fix this? You know, how are we going to do this? Not how are you going to change so that I feel better? The critical thinking component of that, that's becoming more and more required in the dynamics of life. Critical thinking. the analysis of things, putting things together, okay? Oops. So I guess what I, globally would like to say that, in all kinds of conflict resolution, it's vitally important, all right, to take other people's stuff into consideration as well as ours. I think that it's important to kind of, look at the outcomes of things, what it is that we want to have happen. It's more important for resolution than it is, for sense of self and power and control kinds of dynamics. I think that people feel like they are heard, all right, if you take their things into consideration, and that we utilize one another in terms of, having a more beneficial kind of an outcome. So, but that's all I have.
So we do have a question, Dr.
Yes.
So one of our Facebook commenters said, most basic skills in human relationships are not addressed in schools. Where are they learned?
I didn't hear the question very well. I'm sorry.
Most basic skills in human relationships are not addressed in schools. Where are they to be learned?
I think that we are products of our environment, to be truthful with you. I think that it is more of a familia thing. It's more of a subculture kind of component with peers. I don't know if y'all are aware of this, but after about the age of 6, okay, the 85% of the influence comes from our peers. The family, the familia component, although it still is important, has somewhat lessening impact on that availability. And you think about it, your communicative styles, your problem-solving skills and stuff like that really are very much learned things. And if they're ineffective, I think it's really important that we learn to do something else. So.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas Kirk. Thank you for your time, sir.
Mm-hmm.
This is a reminder of the National Suicide Hotline, 1-800-273-TALK. Also of the Wyoming Army National Guard Suicide Hotline of 307-369-3011. Call us if you need us and if you are struggling. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Senior Master Sergeant Mr. Cody Stallings of the United States Air Force. Personal testimony. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Proud to be here. As she said, I'm Senior Master Sergeant Cody Stallings. I am the Operations Superintendent for the 790 Missile Security Forces Squadron here at F.E. Warren. And I've been asked to share a personal story that I've experienced in my life that has affected me throughout my career. In order to share this story, I have to go back to 2007, where I was a young airman stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And I had just recently got back from a deployment in Iraq. I think I got back, don't quote me on it, but I think I got back in September of 2006. And this incident happened in February of 2007. And essentially what happened is I was up on the law enforcement desk and I received a phone call. And I answered the phone as one of the BDOC controllers and I said, Wright-Pat Police, Airman Stallings. And there was a pause on the end of the line and the individual said, who is this? And I said, Wright-Pat Police, Airman Stallings. And there was a sigh and I heard a voice say, hey, Cody. And immediately when I heard, hey, Cody, I knew that the person on the other end of that line was my former supervisor, my fire team leader when I was in Iraq, Staff Sergeant Shane Miles. And he said, hey, Cody, can you do me a favor? I said, yeah, Sergeant Miles, what's up? He said, can you do me a favor and send a patrol down here to Cadam? And I said, yeah, why? What's going on? And he hung up on me. And this chill kind of went over my body of something is not right. I don't know what it is, but that spider sense was tingling and it just didn't feel right. So I immediately looked over to my partner up on the desk and I said, hey, I just got a weird call from Sergeant Miles at Cadam, which is our combat arms range, and he wants us to send a patrol, but he hung up on me. And I could see in his face that he was concerned as well. So he's like, well, did you try calling them back? So I tried calling them back, no answer. And I'm like, hey, something's not right here. We got to send patrols to Cadam. So my partner, Dave Schwartz, he outranked me. So he was kind of the lead controller on the desk. And I distinctly remember him leaning over the desk, standing up. This is before we had standing desks. And he dispatched Alpha 1, Charlie 1, and Papa 1, which were just our patrols, our lead patrols for those assigned sectors. And I very vividly remember him saying, Alpha 1, Charlie 1, Papa 1, I need you to en route to Cadam, cover code 3. And what cover code 3 means is lights and sirens. It's an emergency, right? This isn't take your time, get there. This isn't do the speed limit. This is someone's life might be in danger, get there. And it wasn't normal for us to cover code 3 to things because we're an Air Force base, things are relatively safe. And one of the patrolmen responded back over the radio and said, Raj, I copied cover code 3 with like a question mark on the end of it. And we were like, yes, cover code 3, get there ASAP. So they get there and it's just silence, right? And it's the unknowing, we don't know what's going on. And the patrols arrive on scene, they get into the building, and one of the patrolmen comes up on the radio and says, it appears we have one male down, with what appears to be a self-inflicted gun wound, right? So it's amazing how you revert back to your training when stuff goes wrong and bad things happen, because you just kind of kick into machine mode and you don't really realize that you're doing it until after it's already been done. And Dave and I, we went into machine mode. We started pulling out our QRCs, which are quick reaction checklists, making notifications, pulling up what we needed to do and how we needed to get it done, because we didn't know if Sergeant Miles was still alive or not. One of the patrolmen said that they felt a faint pulse. So we were under the impression that he was still alive at that time. And we were doing everything we could to get medical there. We had notified our flight chief. We were securing the scene because we don't know what's going on. We're cops. We have to go in there with kind of worst case scenario. Someone else might be in the building. And we got medical on scene as quickly as we could. And they loaded Sergeant Miles up into the ambulance and took him away. And we're getting phone calls from all these different people in our chain of command and medical services. And I remember in our blotter entry, we had canned entries for like a death on base. And one of the entries was time of death. And we had to put that in there for the blotter. And we didn't know if there was a time of death because we didn't know if he had died yet. And medical ended up calling us back and said time of death was whatever it was. I don't recall. And my partner, Dave, he responded over the radio to our flight chief, and our flight chief's call sign at the time was Viking. He said, Viking, this is control. Be advised, time of death was whatever it was. And there was a pause over the radio, and our flight chief responded back on the radio kind of angrily, right? Like upset. And he said, cease all radio transmissions now. And me and Dave kind of looked at each other like, what is going on? We have no idea. Did we do something wrong? We're just doing our job. And later that night, we found out that our flight chief was on scene and that Sergeant Miles' fiance had showed up to cat him. And apparently she was the phone call that he made before he called me to send a patrol. So she was worried, and she came, and she didn't know what was going on. And as she was standing next to excuse me. As she was standing next to my flight chief, she heard us come over the radio and announce his time of death. Naturally, she didn't take it very well, and neither did we. And a short while later, our commander came up onto the law enforcement desk dressed in his full-service blues. And there were tears in his eyes. He hugged us. He was crying. It was a rough night, right? I got interviewed by OSI. I was the last person to talk to him alive. The chaplain came out to talk to us, and it was rough. We had lost one of our own. And, you know, there's certain things I remember. We went to his funeral, and I remember I was young. I was 19, maybe, and he just didn't look real to me in that casket. He looked plasticky. His face was swollen. I mean, they did the best they could, but it just didn't look like the Sergeant Miles that I knew and drove on the back of Deuces with in Iraq. And it wasn't the memory of Sergeant Miles that I wanted to keep in my head. So, you know, most people would think that the story stops there, but it didn't. Fast forward several years, now I'm a tech sergeant at the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy in Germany. And I'm part of a small class. I think it was like 16 people. And the topic was suicide prevention. How do we stop it? And does anybody have a story that they would like to tell? So naturally, I'm pretty open about things. And I said, yeah, I'll share my story. And I tell my story, the same story that I'm telling you here today. And a girl in my class, fellow tech sergeant, she gets up and she leaves the room bawling, just sobbing. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, like I get emotional about my story, but I didn't realize that other people would get that emotional about this story. So we stopped the discussion, we took kind of a small break, and we resumed, we switched to another topic, and that was kind of it. That was the end of the conversation for the day. But my class had kind of a tradition to where at the end of class every night, we would go out together to a restaurant. And we were at a restaurant that night, and I was sitting across from her, and I wanted to bring it up and just kind of like ask if she was okay, but it was pretty awkward for me to do that. Well, she actually ended up breaking the silence, and she said, Cody, where were you stationed at when that story happened that you told in class today? And I said, I was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base back in 2007. And she said, and what was the name of the NCO that took his life? And I was like, his name was Staff Sergeant Shane Miles. And she kind of put her hand down, or her head down, and then she pulled up her sleeve. She had a long like sweater on. She pulled up her sleeve, and she had the name Shane tattooed on her wrist. And she said, the story that you told of the fiance that collapsed in the arms of the flight chief when you announced time of death, that was me. That was me. So that was a very eye-opening moment for me, small world that we live in, to where several years later I'm on the other side of the world in a different country, and there I am with this girl. So we bonded over that. Obviously, I expressed my condolences and my sadness and guilt for her having to find out the way that she did. But this is a story that happened to me back in 2007, and now it's 2020, almost 2021, and I think about it pretty often. I mean, there's several times a year where a memory, a sound, a smell, a word, something will bring in a memory of that night, which was by far one of the most chaotic and traumatic nights of my young Air Force career. Tough to live with that experience, tough to know that there was someone that I cared about and looked up to that was hurting so badly privately that they thought the only way out was to take their life. And there's a lot of guilt that's associated with that for all parties that are involved, because we're kind of taught, at least I have been, that there's kind of warning signs and indicators of things that are said or things that are done that may be warning signs of someone is considering this. And that just simply wasn't the case with Shane. It wasn't. His supervisor said that a couple days before his suicide, he was asking for promotion material that he could study for promotion. He was looking at new trucks to buy. He was a car guy. He wanted to buy a new truck. He had a small child at home. This is a guy that had a future and was planning for things in the future and looking forward to things in the future. But for some reason, that day just decided that enough was enough. And it's important for me to share that story with y'all today, because sometimes there's not warning signs, but oftentimes there are. And even if there's not warning signs, I think that if we are better connected as a community, if we are more intrusive as supervisors and friends, and engaged is probably more the appropriate term than intrusive, but letting people know that we care about them and being there for them. And everybody is so wrapped up in their own life, and they're so busy, and they're just worried about what they're going to do that day, or how they're going to put food on the table, or how they're going to pay their bills, that a lot of people don't look to their left and their right to make sure that their wingmen are taken care of too. And that's something that I often think about is, maybe if I would have took the time to call Sergeant Miles a little more, or text him a couple more times, or say, hey, do you want to go out and get some food? Even if I didn't feel like going out and getting food, but just something for him to know that he had someone in his corner that he could have reached out to. So hopefully that story resonates with some of you. I share it because it's an uncomfortable topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but I think it's necessary because, as we all know, one suicide is just too many, and hopefully we can all do our part to try to combat this and really get after it and become more connected. So any questions, comments for me?
No, and thank you, Senior Master Sergeant Cody Stallings. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned. We are setting up at the stage for the other presenter. Thank you so much for your patience. And now, without further ado, Miss Rihanna Brand from the Cheyenne, Wyoming Chamber of Commerce, a survivor's testimony. Erase the stigma, you are not alone. Rihanna?
Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you, but I only have 30 minutes, so I'm going to talk like an auctioneer because we got a lot to cover. So I'm the Director of Partner Services with the Greater Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce. I'm an assist trainer, a QPR master trainer, a certified peer specialist for the state of Wyoming. I wear a lot of hats in many different areas, but my biggest passion in life, aside from being a mother, is suicide prevention. So I'm going to jump right in and get this started because every second matters. Oh, look at that sweet little baby. Isn't it cute? Yeah, that's me. I grew up in Burns, Wyoming, population 198 people. There are more cows than people in that area. Because I lived in a rural area, my bus rides home from school were 2 hours long. So, can you guess what I did during those 2 hours? 2 things. This or impressions. You guys want to see one? I'm going to show you. Be afraid, be very afraid. This one's called the reactor. Yeah, because I was bored all the time, and we lived out in the middle of nowhere, and we didn't have anyone to hang out with. So it looks like I have a pretty normal childhood. I was able to accomplish some pretty cool things. I got 8th in the nation for the 800-meter run when I was 12 years old. Thank you very much. That was my last performance. I never ran it again. Who likes to sprint around the track 2 times? Not me. But if you look at these pictures, I look pretty happy, right? Went to school at Central High School, graduated there. Was part of the dance team. This is me at senior prom. I was still doing impressions. This is me at state track or state basketball up in Casper, walking around wrapped in toilet paper going, I am not your mommy. Because here's the thing, on those 2.5-hour bus rides home, I would get home and I lived in a household with people who were alcoholics. So I would have to make my own dinner, and sometimes when people are alcoholics, they don't hang out with the best type of people. So when I would get home and my mom would be passed out, unspeakable things would happen to me. I'm going to pause right here. If you have ever been touched inappropriately, I need you to speak up and say something. It is not your fault. It is not your fault, and it's not who you are. So you can imagine that left me feeling pretty disgusting, worthless, and all that. But that shows nothing in my face right here, right? I was voted class clown, and I was always the funniest and always the most reliable person, taking on and listening to other people's stuff. Because here's the thing, this is how depression is usually portrayed. Sad, dark, mopey, bleak. But in reality, this was my face of depression. So I went to college. I got the Hathaway Scholarship at UW. I went there and I came home because I just wasn't quite cutting it. I spent more time perfecting my beer pong game than I did going to class. So you can imagine at halfway point, my GPA was 1.7 and my dad said, get your butt home. So I came home and there I was, dropped out of college. My car got repossessed because my boyfriend and I at the time had money embezzlement happening. So there was a lot of things going on in my life. And for some odd reason, my dad chose that specific time in my life to tell my mom what happened when I was little, and she said, I don't believe you. So there I was in this world of hurt. And my boyfriend and I, because this is what I did with my pain at the time, I went and numbed myself. We went and played beer pong at CB Potts. It was the beer pong championships. And because I'd spent more time perfecting my beer pong game in college, you know I was pretty good. So we get to the final table, and we're going to set up, and I look across the table, and this is after many games of beer pong, so a lot of alcohol. I look across the table, and there is this person that accidentally, yes, it was an accident, it was a car accident, killed my best friend when I was 16. I hadn't seen him since the funeral, and something triggered in my brain. I snapped. I freaked out. I grabbed the table. I threw it. Beer went everywhere. My boyfriend grabbed me, pulled me out of there. The cops got called. We went back to my house, and there I was in this world of pain, and my boyfriend at the time went and locked himself in the bedroom. Because that's what you do when someone's depressed and hurting. You just leave them alone, right? No. So there I was, alcohol-induced, in a world of pain, and the next thing I saw when I looked up was a bottle of painkillers. I ingested over 1,000 painkillers that night, and I don't remember very much, but my dad said I called him and said, "Daddy, I don't want to die." And he rushed to me, picked me up, and took me to the emergency room where I had my stomach pumped, ate charcoal, and it looks like everything's fine on the outside. But I have 10 metal coils in my body from the damage that was done when I attempted to take my life. But that's kind of like mental health, right? Everything looks fine and dandy on the outside, but there could be a world of pain on the inside. So they was sent to behavioral health unit. I was there for 72 hours. They fed me in a plethora of different medications. The first night, the medication, I had a very bad reaction, and it gave me more suicidal thoughts. I was going to rip the bars off of the windows. I could not live any longer. So by the third day, I figured out how to play the game and told the doctors, yes, I can't wait to get home. And I went home. I never filled the prescription. I never got a phone call from a doctor, and I never had any follow-up whatsoever. So I left with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. That's like having a motivation to change the world one moment and then having no motivation to even wash yourself the next. I explain it to my children. I'm a single mom of 3 kids. It's like one moment I'm Tigger. Let's go to the park. Let's go to Waterworld. Let's go have fun, 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 fun. And the next moment I'm like, I don't even know how to make breakfast this morning, son. He's like, it's okay, Eeyore. I'll go pour the cereal. So that was the explanation, and mind you, this picture was taken 3 days before I attempted to take my life, with that funny eyeball right there. Because here's the thing, there's more. So I left with a bipolar diagnosis, no follow-up from doctors, and I continued to self-medicate. But then, once I had my first child, I started to dig in deep. Because if they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, I was going to. So I picked up the book called The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And it explains this. Bipolar disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder have the same symptoms, but a different treatment. So the symptoms, hyperarousal. I'm very aware of my surroundings. It can be beautiful. It's like an orchestra when you're out in the middle of nature listening to all the things that are happening. But if you're in the middle of a city trying to focus and concentrate and all you can hear are the cars passing by, the people talking, screaming down the road, it's hard. Agitation. You can imagine with all of that hyperarousal and hypersensitivity that I have a very short fuse sometimes. Feeling worthless. From what happened to me, I was left feeling disgusting and unlovable. Fatigue and loss of energy. The best way I can describe it to you is stand and flex for 2 hours straight, and then release and see how your body feels. Because I was under a constant observation trying to live in survival mode to protect myself. So my muscles were constantly flexed so that I could, and tensed so that I could protect myself and run if I needed to. Problem sleeping. This goes both ways. The most I've ever lost sleep is 4 days. By that 3rd day, you better believe the hallucinations were real. The adverse way is insomnia, or is sleeping too much. I would miss dance practice in my senior years and not just care. No pleasure in activities. Again, I love to dance, and I just had no energy to do so. And then thoughts of suicide. For most of my life, I thought this world would be a better world without me. So what's really going on? Usually I show a video, but again, I'm short on time, so I highly suggest for you to go look up the actual science of what's happening in our brain. Specifically in the amygdala, the medial prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus. The amygdala and the hippocampus sit here in our brain. That's the reptilian portion. So if you're operating from here, you're operating from survival mode. Literally, life, death, life, death, life, death. But your medial prefrontal cortex right here brings you with a grander view of life. Oh, there are other options besides just life, death, life, death. This is where resiliency is born. So I'm going to show you a brain scan. This is what a depressed brain looks like versus a non-depressed brain. You can see here, very much in the amygdala and the hippocampus region, that is where the depressed brain is operating. Up here is the medial prefrontal cortex. There is zero activity happening when someone is depressed. But a non-depressed brain, look at how that's lit up, right? So I want to talk to you guys. Our words matter to each other. You can literally speak light or life into someone. And I'm going to do a social experiment real quick. Jeremy, can you come here, please? This is Jeremy Bay. He is a great friend of mine. We are co-assist trainers, applied suicide intervention skills trainer. So I want to show you. Just turn and look at them. Jeremy, I just want to tell you, you look sharp today, man. You are looking great. You're welcome.
Was having a sale.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Did you see his face? What happened to his face? It, bing, lit up, right? Thank you. Appreciate that. Because what's happening? What if you speak unkind words to someone? You're shutting off their light, right? But as you're speaking kind words to someone, you are activating something I call to the students the party brain. All the areas are starting to light up. You're turning on the lights, inviting people over. We're having Doritos and having a great old time, right? But if you speak unkind words to someone, kicking everyone out, shutting it off. It's my party, I can cry if I want to, right? So our words matter to each other. You see someone down and out on their luck, go speak kindness to them in some sort of way. And more than that, do actions of kindness. Ask them what they actually need in life at that moment. So signs and symptoms. We've all run over this. We've probably done suicide prevention trainings. But if a person talks about being a burden to others, feeling trapped in a situation, stuck between a rock and a hard place and they can't see a way out, experiencing unbearable pain, this can come out of our bodies in multiple different ways. From migraines to my stress pocket sits here. If I'm not doing good, ask me to raise my left hand and it will sit about here. That's so tight, that tension. Having no reason to live and talking about killing themselves, that's very forward there. We're going to flip over to behavior, specific things to look out for, increased use of alcohol or drugs. What was I doing before I attempted to take my life? Drinking. What is alcohol? A depressant. So if you're feeding your depressed brain more depression, it's not going to feel even better at all. And in fact, you're numbing the pain to just try to dig through it tomorrow. Looking for a way to kill themselves, such as searching online for materials or means. This is important for us to teach our youth and adolescents so that we can teach them how to do this. At the top of every browser, you can touch on the right-hand side a drop-down box, and it'll say history. Look at the history of what people are searching. It's as simple as, hey, I forgot my phone. Can I use it to call my mom? Can I use it to call my boyfriend? Look. And what if you find something? Oh, geez. Then you just go to him and you say, hey, you know, I noticed that you haven't been showing up to this event that you really love to do lately, and I've been kind of concerned about you, and I know you might be mad, but just know that I'm doing this because I care. I searched on your history and I found this. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Ask them directly. Because honestly, if you do not ask directly, if you ask, you're not going to do something crazy. You're not going to hurt yourself. We cannot ask these. We have to ask directly. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Because as a person receiving that, the amount of relief of someone asking that question, you want to carry some of this with me? Yeah, it's beautiful. So ask the question directly, and you will get a direct response. Acting recklessly. Yes, this could be driving recklessly, not wearing your seatbelt and things like that, but it could also be not showing up to work, not doing your homework assignments, not doing your job to its utmost potential, right? Withdrawing from activities, isolating from family and friends. Depression is a liar, it's a liar, it's a liar. It's going to tell you that no one cares, that you're all alone, but you cannot listen to it. When you hear those or feel those thoughts, do the opposite. You need to outreach to someone and let them know that you are struggling. Sleeping too much or too little, visiting or calling people to say goodbye. This is hard. So in Laramie County, I was a co-founder of the LOST team, Local Outreach to Survivors of Suicide, where we go out on scene and meet the families immediately after the loss of a loved one to suicide, help comfort, console, and distract so the coroner could do their job, and help them out with things like biohazard cleanings and how to arrange a funeral, what to do with student loans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm telling you this because I had to go and tell a few of my friends from high school that their father passed. And they both told me, both of them live in different areas of the country. They both told me that that Tuesday, it was a Friday when I had to call them, that Tuesday their dad had called and told them, you know, I just want you to know that I love you and I'm really proud of you. And no matter what, I'm always, always, always gonna love you. And both of them, it sat wrong. They were like, okay. If you get a phone call like that, yes, well, thank you so much for calling. And I love you too. But this seems kind of out of the blue. Is everything all right? If someone is calling to say goodbye, they're not going to tell you exactly. So try to ask the question when you hear something and feel something if it's not right. Aggression will pop over to mood. People who are considering suicide often display one or more of the following moods: depression, loss of interest, rage, irritability. So I'm just going to ask you this. You guys have all lost or had a night of asleep where you just lost a few hours, right? Tossed and turned, and when you wake up that next morning, you're like, spring out of bed, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. No, you don't do that. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, who turned on the light? Just want to cuddle in my bed some more. And as you're walking around that day, your body feels achy, your legs feel tired, all this stuff, right? That's how a person with depression feels every single day, times 10, times 100, depending on the level. So you can imagine that rage and irritability, it's there, right? Because when you lose that sleep that night, you are a vision of patience with people, right? No. So, humiliation. This is huge. I used to work at Grace for Two Brothers Foundation, and the office was above the Paramount Cafe. I struggle particularly around my birthday, which is in November, so it's snowing, right? So it's hard for me to get out of bed, and it was that morning. It was snowing, and I just piled my hair on top of my head, threw something on, went into the cafe, and it was packed. I'm like, great. Hey, hi, how's it going? Nice to see you, yeah. And I get to the staircase, and I march up the first 3 stairs, and I turn to go hit the other ones, and bam, fall flat on my face. Loud noise, right? Everyone turns and looks at me, and I'm laying on the ground like, oh my gosh, I wish I were a piece of snow so I could melt into the ground right now. And then all of a sudden I felt a hand on my shoulder. And it was this lady I'd only met twice in passing. And she goes, come here, let me help you up. Okay, now bow. And everyone laughed, clapped in the cafe, and it was a beautiful moment. But what could have happened? I could have peeled myself off the ground, tucked my tail between my legs, marched up those stairs, and been like, oh my gosh, so humiliated. What did I do? How can I be so clumsy? And beat myself up for probably days on end. But the difference, what was the difference? An extended hand, right? Helping me up. Someone noticed and knew to do that. But then also, she activated my party brain. She made me giggle. She laughed with me instead of at me. And then anxiety. This can come out in a lot of different ways. You can tell when I'm struggling the most because I will pick my cuticles until they bleed. It's gross, I know, but it still happens. But this can also be self-injury. So I just want to let you know that there are many tools out there. If you struggle with self-injury, there are many tools like EFT tapping, emotional freedom tapping, specific pinpoints on your body as you walk through whatever problem is happening. Looks kind of funny, but I like it better than the alternative of hurting yourself. So, sorry, clicker's not working. I want to talk to you about coping skills. Mine are going to look way different than yours, but I'm going to give you a broad overview here. So every morning when I wake up, I do some journaling, morning devotionals, and meditation. I spend some time loving on me and giving myself some good energy before I go out into the world and dish that out too. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. Take care of yourself. Yoga, at least twice a week, and hula hooping. Yeah, I'm not talking about like the 1960s style. I'm talking about hula hooping with tricks and sometimes fire. And let me tell you, this hula hoop has been the greatest recovery coping skill tool for me, because I lived with something called disassociation, where the trauma from when I was younger, my brain couldn't handle, so I literally checked out and put myself on autopilot. I don't remember a lot of my childhood. I have to be fully present in the moment in order to keep this sucker going. I have to be here with both feet on the ground, like our previous speaker said. Hiking, paddleboarding, traveling, something. Give yourself something to look forward to. Because on those bad days, I know that this Saturday, my son turns 13 and we're going to go stay in a hotel with a bunch of teenage boys and go swimming and eat all the junk food, and it's going to be a blast, right? So if today was a rough day, I could tell myself, if I make it through today, then there's only one more day. If I make it through the day, there's only one more day and I get to have fun. So also, if you see someone struggling, plan something for them to look forward to. It could be as simple as a concert or a movie or a cup of coffee, something. Give them something to look forward to. Therapist, talking to someone. I mean, we all use a physical therapist, or maybe our PE teacher taught us how to lift weights, right? They teach us how to isolate a muscle in order to strengthen it. So we're not going to do leg presses in order to strengthen our biceps, right? No. A therapist is a trainer for our brain. They are isolating and pinpointing sections of our brain in order to strengthen them. Please go talk to someone. It's beneficial and it saved my life. In order to be enough, I have to eat and sleep enough. We talked about sleep, but I want to talk about food. Some of us that struggle with anxiety get a pit in our stomach and we are not hungry. So if that happens to you, I want you to take whatever you're going to eat, the sandwich, a cracker, whatever, pop it in your mouth and swallow it down like a pill. Use water. Something. You need substance. Your car won't run without gas. Your body won't run without nutrition. Essential oils and medication. I don't use medication, but I am not a medication shamer. If you need to use it, please, by all means, use it. If you have someone who has diabetes, you're not going to go tell them, just think more positively and that insulin's going to come. No, they need that medicine to stay alive. I use essential oils and all of these coping skills, and I have used medication in the past when it's gotten bad. Helping others. Shameless plug for Grace for Two Brothers. They're always looking for volunteers, but there's tons of nonprofits in our area. You could go be a professional puppy cuddler at the animal shelter or Black Dog Animal Rescue. You can go to the nursing homes. They're lonely there. Go read to them once a week, or go play chess, piano, sing, talk about their stories of life, right? Helping others. Things I avoid. If I am struggling, I cannot drink or do drugs or any of that. We talked about the effects of our brain. Please, if someone is depressed, don't take them out for drinks. Talk with them. Go get them some coffee and some food. Comfort food like chicken noodle soup or something, right? Negative people. I'm not saying, oh my gosh, you're too negative, bye Felicia. What I'm saying is sometimes we all have our own stuff to struggle with. And so if someone is coming at you constantly, you can tell them, hey, can I talk with you on Sunday? I'm having a particularly rough week and I just need a few days. So you can say not right now. And that's another last thing, saying yes to everything. I'm a people pleaser. You cannot say yes to everything or you will yes yourself into a frenzy. So I had a video to play, but I don't know if it's going to. Can I play? Does this have a microphone? No?
She can play it on YouTube. Yeah, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
I'm 8 years old and I'm thinking about suicide. I'm thinking about life, about death, about the maddening puzzle we have blindly left to piece together. I'm thinking about how hard it is to go to school when I don't know if today will end in a passing grade or a bloody nose. I'm thinking about my only friend, a man 3 times my age who continually puts his hands on my skin in a way that I know is not supposed to happen. I'm thinking about what it feels like to go to sleep at night and cover my head to hide from the fighting screams and the breaking glass that is coming from the other room in a place that I am forced to call my home. But more than anything, I'm thinking, what if? What if I didn't live this life anymore? I'm 15 years old and I'm thinking about suicide. I'm standing in a psychiatric hospital and there are long, thin lines of open skin trailing across my arms, chest, and stomach. There is a man standing across from me and he's asking me why. Why did you do this to yourself? I'm thinking I want to tell him, but I can't. I can't because I don't know. I'm thinking maybe it's because I just wanted the pain on the inside to reflect on the outside. I'm thinking maybe it's because my mind has become so overrun with illness that pain has become my only reality. I'm thinking maybe it's because no one quite understands what it feels like to be me. More than anything, I'm thinking, what if? What if I didn't live this life anymore? I'm 20 years old and I'm thinking about suicide. I'm sitting on the edge of a rented bed in a place that I have no business calling home. My mind is overrun with memories from an entire lifetime. I'm thinking of days of when I was bullied, when the only thing I learned from elementary school was how to run from balled up fists and angry pointing fingers. I'm thinking of growing up in a house that taught me home meant nothing more than slamming doors and deep, slow breaths. I'm thinking of how bad it hurt when I told her I loved her and she couldn't say she loved me back. I'm thinking about how I've spent more time in a psychiatric hospital than I have in a classroom. And more than anything, I'm thinking, what if? What if I didn't live this life anymore?
This is my what if. What if I weren't here anymore? These are my 3 babies. Beautiful babies. I wouldn't have the memories of my daughter splashing her toes in the water last September for the first time when we went to Florida. I wouldn't have the memory of Aiden making that game-winning shot last year and the crowd cheering and his face so proud and beaming. What if? What if I weren't here? The same goes for you. Find your passion and your purpose. Connect to it and start driving towards it. You are worth this life. You are worth more than words could ever express. One last thing, I don't want to leave you without this, where to get help. So You've got the text line, WIO to 741-741. Call 1-800-273-8255. The Trevor Project is for LGBTQ+. Youth Alternatives is a wonderful, wonderful place for adolescents to go here in our city. HealthWorks, they do low income and sliding scale fees. There's tons more options out there, you guys. Grace for Two Brothers, they have a peer support group on Thursday nights. If you've lost a loved one to suicide, there is a grief support group. And then if you are armed forces, I know that sometimes it's scary when you're an active duty military member to go speak up. There's all of these questions and there's a stigma that surrounds it. But I want to tell you, my friends at the Vet Center, they don't speak out to anyone else about what's happening in your life unless they absolutely have to, unless your life or someone else's were at risk. They are a safe space for you to go talk. And please, go talk. Check on each other. Activate each other's party brains. And know that this life is always worth living, even in the hard moments too. Thank you very much for your time. I really have enjoyed spending this morning with you. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Ms. Rihanna Brund from the Cheyenne, Wyoming Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Linda Benson from the Cheyenne VA Suicide Prevention Coordinator, managing the suicide calls and interventions. Welcome, Miss Benson.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here and very passionate about the subject of suicide prevention. I wanted to start by mentioning and extending appreciation to all the people that have spoken so far today. There's so much power in a story. And our survivors that have spoken today have had great impact, as has the experienced mental health professional that shared some of the interventions that are relevant when our tank is full, when our emotional tank is full. Rihanna Brand, I want to thank you. She served as the lead for Grace for Two Brothers for many years. That woman has rocked the suicide prevention in this community and has opened doors for the rest of us that are concerned and invested in suicide prevention. The focus today is primarily military armed forces, individuals that are dealing with stress and confronting suicide risk, as well as veterans, both combat and other veterans who have encountered unusual stress that has carried over following their service into their civilian life, or they may still be active duty military and dealing with undue stress. I have been asked to talk a little bit about my role, and I don't want to bore you with that too much, but I want to start with describing a shift. There's been a societal shift, and in terms of those of us in the helping professions and the public at large, there's been an endeavor to educate and train and inform everyone about the risks of suicide and the things that we can do to intervene, to care, to be there. So it used to be that traditionally you'd look to the crisis intervention people and the suicide prevention people and the mental health people for concerns about suicide risk, suicide gestures. It has changed because we've learned that, you know, this agency over here and this hospital over here and the police department here, and those of us that work, you know, at hospitals, working in a disjointed manner. Excuse me, I'm going to grab my water. Working, you know, in little clusters doesn't make a difference. Unity, collaboration, coordination with one another. There's great power in that. And I have just been so honored to work this year, with the prevention leads from F.E. Warren Air Force Base, with the prevention leads from the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard, two wonderful prevention leads at the Air National Guard. Wonderful talent and tremendous commitment. The theme that military chose this year, Connect and Protect, and the VA emphasized be there, are one and the same. Being there is being present, care, ask the question, extend a warm, kind remark or gesture. It's powerful. So being aware, showing compassion, listening without judgment, listening to validate whatever an individual that's struggling has to share with you. Caring gestures. There was a nice clip that the VA Suicide Prevention nationally put out this year, and it just was a clip of humans being humans. An individual in a coffee shop seeing somebody looking downhearted and alone, and buying them a donut or bringing them a cup of coffee or another beverage. Standing in line at a fast food restaurant, and you see somebody kind of dejected, looking maybe a little disheveled, pay it forward, buy them the meal. There's so many ways that we can, in small ways and large ways, extend human caring to reinforce that an individual that's struggling is worthwhile, that they're valuable, they have purpose, that there is hope and there is help. So the major shift to the public health approach in suicide prevention is networking and partnering with other people in the community, coordinating our efforts. And I am pleased to say at the VA, you know, only 1/3 of veterans get services at the VA. There's 2/3 out there that are alienated for whatever reason, maybe a bad experience, or the services didn't seem to suit them at a given time. We want to support our veterans getting help where they're open to getting help. We've had wonderful experiences with our chaplains, and I know that there's military chaplains as well, but our VA chaplains are very passionate about suicide prevention, rural outreach, education, and also just being there to answer a call about for somebody that's in distress. Another shift has been that we're hiring more and more peer support specialists at the VA. And they are former active duty military people that are concerned about their brothers and sisters that may be suffering after their military experience and their adjustment back to civilian life. So uniting, coordinating, collaborating is powerful, good stuff. I wanted to share a few words from one of the psychologists that works nationally at the VA. She expressed a perspective about veterans and suicide risk and prevention that was very warm and matter-of-fact and reducing the stigma. And I'm paraphrasing her, so I am going to be referring to her words, but it's not verbatim, that's right. Empower veterans, this is our goal, empower veterans and end the national tragedy of suicide. Suicide is one of the most challenging societal issues of our time, and it affects veterans at alarming rates. I have seen intense suffering and emotional resilience. I've seen the joy of personal growth, the power of effective clinical care. I've witnessed the magic when communities collaborate, combine resources, and coordinate their efforts. Now, while the debt that we owe to our veterans can never fully be repaid, we must empower men and women to lead healthy, productive, meaningful lives after they take off the uniform. Our goal is to ensure that veterans find purpose and discover belonging within civilian communities. And that is a very challenging process at times. For those struggling with emotional pain and hopelessness, we must provide hope and effective caring. That's what the Be There, Connect to Protect campaign is all about. We must strengthen connections and coordinate our services within our communities. We need to plan to prioritize areas that will make the biggest impact in the lives of veterans now, while continuing to build a foundation for the national collaborative efforts, because they're evolving over time. Strengthening the connection, coordinating services in our communities to ensure veterans receive the opportunities and support that they deserve. Now, there's 5 areas we're doing this, and I'm not going to expound on it because our previous speakers have done a marvelous job of talking about services, resources, and things we can do as individuals to help one another. First thing is culture change. Reduce the stigma. Communicate, educate, train. Rihanna Brown referred to QPR training. And what was the other one? Assist training, thank you. Wonderful programs, very empowering and enlightening. Access to care. We have to do a better job of linking people in distress to care. And like I said, 1/3 of veterans are receiving these services at the VA. And there's multiple support services that we can offer. But our community has other wonderful services and resources. But we, as just individuals, we want to be more alert. We want to be more observant so that we can identify people that are suffering. Because it's those people without intervention or relief that are at the greatest risk for thinking about suicide, planning suicide, and we want to prevent the intent to die by suicide. We've already talked about the robust community engagement and how important the partnerships are. There's research ongoing. Now that sounds cold and impersonal. Statistics, numbers, oh yeah, you VA people are all just about checking the boxes and counting. I understand it appears that way, but information is power. And as we collect data about those who have either attempted to die by suicide or who we have tragically lost by suicide, with that data we can develop a greater understanding of where our services are lacking and where we need to put our energy and resources. So we want to change the conversation and people's understanding about suicide. I wanted to do an object lesson. And it's a messy object lesson, but I think that visuals sometimes powerfully communicate things, as Rihanna did with her hula hoop. I couldn't have done that, Rihanna, I'm impressed. But I can pour things into bottles. So, excuse me as I remove this. Now, whoa, all of us have an emotional tank where we store the feelings about our everyday experiences. This container represents a veteran's emotional tank. And our previous speakers have touched on some of the risk factors for suicide. Not just for veterans, some of these apply to all of us. The truth is, all of us have a saturation point, a point at which we cannot take any more. Some of the stories by our survivors have illustrated that very well. And so I'll be redundant in some areas, but this emphasis is very important. I talked about physical pain. Physical pain can come from injuries, as were discussed by Tim Shepard this morning, and the suffering from chronic, unrelenting pain. You don't know when it's going to end. It can lead, that alone can lead a person to wanting to end it all. Do I have to continue to always live like this? I cannot cope with that thought. I would rather die than to suffer from pain every day. So, pain is added to the emotional tank. Moral injury. Moral injury is more common, I believe, in military and in the lives of veterans due to engaging in combat theater, witnessing the death of a battle buddy, taking the life of somebody in the conflict, the marital and family problems that can happen during deployment. There's a lot of shame, there's guilt, and that's what moral injury is. For those of us who have had substance or alcohol problems and have hurt others and hurt a loved one or a family member, there's moral injury there. There's some guilt and shame about that. But the bad choices that we make or the negative experiences we have in life don't define who we are. And we want to talk about and express our feelings about trauma and difficult experiences we've gone through. That's very difficult in many cases for veterans. So we're going to add guilt, shame, moral injury to our emotional tank. There's been conversation about alcohol and substance abuse. Sometimes it's a habit, sometimes it's an addiction. It affects every aspect of life: physical, mental, relationship, employment, finances. So we're going to add that to our emotional tank. Mental health diagnosis. PTSD being one of the most predominant. It is distinctly a risk factor. Rihanna talked about complex PTSD. I've worked with many fine men and women that are experiencing the disruption and just the overwhelming symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, because as she pointed out, it's a brain biology connection that is really woven tightly together, and it can very much impair the quality of life and our productivity in life. Now, there's depression, there's other anxiety disorders, there's other stressors, day-to-day stressors, there's death, there's divorce, there's children with problems. So we're going to add trauma, particularly post-traumatic stress disorder secondary to military service, into our emotional tank. Finances are a big one, thus the green. Financial strain is a significant risk factor for suicide. Sometimes we're in a situation where it just seems like it's hopeless and it will never end. It affects our capacity to eat well. It can affect our ability to sustain ourselves with a roof over the head. It's a very pervasive stressor. Many of us have experienced that in our day-to-day lives. But you take a veteran who's already experiencing some of these other things, and you throw in the economic stress that adds and fills up the emotional tank some more. I'm going to add this mental health container that refers to chronic anxiety, sadness, depression, any adjustment disorder. Takes up space in our emotional tank. Today, and this year's theme, though, strongly emphasizes the importance of social connection. On the contrary, social isolation that may happen in old age, when spouses pass on, or one finds himself alone. Social isolation may be intentional because one is in pain. A person's nervous system is so overwhelmed, the thought of interacting with others is just too anxiety-provoking and uncomfortable to contemplate. That is a significant risk factor. As you can see, we're running low in space in our emotional tank. So much so that family conflict, marital relationship conflict, there's no room for that. Anger, rage, agitation. This has been spoken about today. Rage can happen just because this tank is too full. Rage can happen in response to depression, anxiety, just being overloaded with psychosocial stress, the day-to-day events of life. So while I'm being cautious because our emotional tank is pretty darn full, it's when this tank is full and we're not getting the support and help that we need, that the risk of suicidal thoughts, thinking more and more about means to end one's life, and getting closer to that dangerous and tragic juncture. We want to prevent it. But every one of us can only contain so much. This is a precautionary move. The emotional tank is very heavy as well. So what happens if we don't get relief? What happens if we don't get the kind of help that we need in our unique individual circumstance? Now, you note on here, I put COVID. All of us have our own stress. But then the pandemic came along. Interestingly, the pandemic has contributed to financial woes. It has caused disruption in employment. It has increased conflict in families and in marriages. People are dying. People are grieving. People are fearful. So that and other events and unrest in our country can lead to that point. Getting to that overwhelmed point, overloaded point, is not our fault. Just gonna throw in a little rage here. But if we don't get that support, if we don't get the services and the assistance that we need, any one of us are vulnerable to reach the point of overload. And when that occurs, we spill over. Another way I refer to it is our junk closet bus open. Every one of us can only contain so much in our emotional tank before it gets dangerous and high risk. I often say in my trainings, every one of us is vulnerable for life to get in our face. When life is in our face, as represented by my hands in my face, we lose our perspective. We don't see the hope. We don't see the help. We don't see the purpose. And we're vulnerable to spill over. We're all passionately invested in suicide prevention, but we invite everyone to learn, reach out, be there, care, be aware, connect, because it's a powerful factor of protection in managing suicide prevention. It's not a simple solution. It's going to require our persistent efforts. But I do believe that there is hope. And I appreciate all those others that participated in getting this message out today. Be aware, be there, extend care. Thank you.
Cheyenne Suicide Prevention Coordinator, thank you. We will now take a brief 5-minute break for technical setup for the next speaker. This is a reminder of the National Suicide Hotline, 1-800-273-TALK, and the Wyoming Army National Guard Suicide Hotline, 307-369-3011. You are not alone. We need you. Thank you.
Hey, can you hear me? Hey, can you guys hear me yet? Martin, and I'm the program manager at the Wyoming Department of Health for the Injury and Violence Prevention Program. And one of our main focus areas is suicide prevention. And so today I just wanted to take a look at the data with you guys and talk a little bit about what we're doing at the state level. So first, I'm going to take a look at the big picture and then talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we face in suicide prevention, then take a look at some of the Wyoming data, how we're using that data, what is on the horizon as far as data collection is concerned with the Wyoming Violent Death Reporting System, and then resources. So first off, typically when you're talking about suicide prevention, this is the number that you're going to see over and over again. And this number is the number of deaths by suicide in the United States in 2018. So it's a big number, but it doesn't show the full picture of the impact of suicide on the United States. So if you've ever done any work in public health, you've probably seen this analogy a million times, so bear with me. But in the US in 2018, the total suicides were 48,344, and suicide was the 10th leading cause of death. But we know that that is just the tip of the iceberg. Really, just like an iceberg, one of the main things you have to worry about is all the stuff underneath that you kind of can't see, all the stuff below the water. So we also know that in addition to those 48,344 deaths, that approximately 5% to 25% additional suicides took place and were not captured. And I'll get into that a little bit more when I talk about challenges. We also know that suicidal behavior is 40 to 100 times greater than the number of deaths by suicide. And we had 1.4 million documented attempts in the US in 2018. Those are only attempts that were documented. So where somebody sought help at a hospital potentially, and then that visit was coded in the system as a suicide attempt. So there are a lot that aren't being captured. We also know that the people affected by deaths and attempts is a very large number. In recent studies, they've determined that 125 people on average are impacted for every suicide. And I know that that number to some may seem kind of large, but if you think about it, we've got older adults that die by suicide. You know, maybe they're in their 80s, they're socially isolated, they don't have a lot of family left. So that death may impact significantly less than 125. But on the other side, you also have, you know, the death of a high school student by suicide. And that is going to have a much larger impact in terms of numbers of people affected on a community. So the average is around 125 per death. And then that's not even taking into account all of, you know, if you have a public figure that dies by suicide, you know, that death can impact thousands of people. So if we take that number, 125, and look at just the number of deaths that we know of, not even taking into consideration the unreported suicides, then that is an impact of some varying degree to 6 million people in the US. Then if we take just the number of documented attempts, that's an impact of an additional 175 million. So you can see that suicide touches so many more people than just that 48,344. We're just looking at deaths and attempts that have been actually, captured in the official count, and we're already at over 180 million people being impacted to some degree. We also know that in 2018, 16,156,356 people reported thoughts of suicide. So next, I want to show you guys this map of suicide mortality by state. And the lightest color, yellow, which you can see here, Illinois, California, New York, New Jersey. These states have the lowest suicide rate in the country. And then we've got Texas, this color, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia. These states have the next highest rate. And then we've got Florida, South Carolina, Louisiana, then that's the next one up. And then Arizona, Nevada, the Dakotas, the next one up. This darkest red color, which includes these states right here and Alaska, have the highest suicide rate in the country. And this is often referred to as the suicide belt. There are a lot of theories as to why the suicide rate is so much higher in this area. There isn't one definitive answer yet. A lot of people are trying to study this and figure out what the issue is so that we can attack it. But right now, some of the theories are elevation. You'll notice this area follows the Rockies. Some people say that these are more isolated states, more rural states where people, we know social isolation has a big impact on increased suicidality. So there are a lot of theories out there, but we are unfortunately in this suicide belt, in this region with the highest rate. The US suicide rate in 2018 was 14.8 per 100,000 individuals. And the rate of suicide was highest in middle-aged white men. In 2018, men died by suicide 3.56 times more often than women. And on average, there were 132 suicides per day. White males accounted for 69.67% of all deaths by suicide in 2018. And in 2018, firearms accounted for 50.57% of all suicide deaths. And I did not mention, but that is another one of the theories, that these states also have the highest firearm ownership rate per capita. So I think it's like most things, it's probably a little bit of each of these factors that come into play as to why this region has such a high suicide rate. So next, I want to talk to you guys about some of the challenges that we face. So in the iceberg slide, I referred to the fact that some of these deaths we do not know. Not everything is reported. Not everything is captured. And some of the challenges with that are, at the local level, we have 23 different counties in our state. Each of those counties has a different coroner. Some of the coroners have medical backgrounds, some don't. It's an elected position. And this is very common throughout the country, to have the position of coroner be an elected position, and it doesn't require having a medical background. We also know that in smaller communities, we hear that, there is a lot of stigma around suicide, and oftentimes not with any malintent. Coroners will offer to rule a death as accidental, versus as a suicide, to spare the family any shame. This is not just anecdotal. I've heard this from the parents of teens that have died by suicide here in Wyoming, and some agree to this, and then some get really upset by it and end up calling me to talk about it, because they realize immediately the need to have the accurate reporting on the number of suicides so that we can actually prevent these from happening in the future. So in addition to that challenge of getting the correct data captured, there's so much stigma around mental health and suicide. And that plays in even our language, talking about suicide. There's been a big shift to, instead of saying commit suicide, say die by suicide, because you commit a crime, you commit a bad act, but suicide has been decriminalized in all 50 states. And the only thing that it serves to do is cause more shame to the family, the survivors of a suicide, and changing that language around suicide and how we talk about it is an attempt to destigmatize suicide. We also have our cowboy up culture here. We look at a lot of, as I was talking about, the national rates, and this is reflected in our Wyoming rates as well. A lot of the suicides are middle-aged white males, and they're often looked at as breadwinners and have to be strong. And we have a history in our country of viewing mental health as something very different from physical health, even though now we know that that is not true. And some people view it as a character flaw or something that they can just get over. And that is another harmful stigma around mental health, because you would never say to somebody with, COVID-19, for example, buck up, get over it. You would obviously recognize that, if you're sick, you can't help it. And you would want them to seek treatment. And the same is true for mental health. There are also a lot of myths around suicide. Things like talking about it will just make it worse. Or if you talk about it, that'll plant that idea in that person's head, and then they will act on that. We conducted multiple studies, and those have been proven to be false. It's not true. It's healthier to normalize it by talking about it, and destigmatizing it. And some of the other issues that we have are things like even just the media coverage of violence in general. If you turn on the television and watch many of the shows that are out there, there are whole networks that are dedicated to shows that talk about homicide. But the reality is, in every single state in the US, the suicide rate is higher than the homicide rate. And it's just another way of kind of keeping suicide hush hush and behind closed doors. It's just another reason that we need to break that stigma down. So as far as Wyoming is concerned, in Wyoming, we have the second highest rate in the US. Our rate per 100,000 is 25.4. That's compared to the national rate of 14.8. So you can see it's quite a bit higher than the national rate, and these numbers are from 2018. I can tell you that all the way back to 1989, which is as far back as our data goes, we've been in the top 10 highest rates in the country in Wyoming. So hopefully you guys can see this and it's not too small, but in 2008 to 2018, ranking by age per 100,000, our highest rate in Wyoming with the rate of 40.53, which is well more than double the national average, is in the age group of 80 to 84-year-olds. The second highest rate is almost tied with the second and the third, being right around 36 per 100,000, and that's 40 to 44-year-olds and 85 and up. And then after that, 45 to 49, 35 to 39. So we're still talking about the middle-aged population, but also secondary to that is the older adult population, especially 80 and up. Also in Wyoming, I've got this graph which is showing you the means or mechanism as well as gender from 2008 to 2018. So overall, firearms accounted for 65.4% of all suicides. And for males, firearms were used in just under 70% of all deaths by suicide, while conversely, it was only 48% for females. Suffocation, which also includes hanging, that is higher in females, only slightly, but still higher in females and lower in males. Poisoning or overdose is highest in female and lowest in males as means. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how we're going to use the data that we have right now to inform prevention efforts. So again, another very common public health model is the upstream or the river analogy. So if we're up here before we get to the dam, I want you to think about that as contributaries to suicide. So there's no thought of suicide, but this is where we have things like stress, job loss, depression, substance abuse, all of these different things that can contribute, not always, but sometimes can contribute to thoughts of suicide. And then once we get here to the dam, this is where we're thinking more of, we're having those thoughts of suicide, we're contemplating it. As we get a little bit further down, this is where we're starting to display suicidal behavior. So maybe coming up with a plan, acquiring access to lethal means, self-harm. And then down at the bottom of the river is where we have an attempt or suicide. So at the bottom is death. So working in prevention, our goal is to try to help people and prevent them from even thinking about suicide, or once they've thought about it, to try and bring them back up here before they go to the dam. So in prevention, we're trying to reduce things that contribute to suicide. So we call this upstream prevention. So we're trying to reduce those things like the stressors of job loss or depression or the end of a marriage or all the different things, substance abuse that could lead to somebody thinking about suicide. And then with intervention, we're trying to increase the safety of persons with thoughts of suicide. So in this area, we're thinking more about, access to lethal means, safe gun storage, gun locks, things of that nature. Having trained people in your communities that are able to spot those warning signs and be able to provide help to that person who is already thinking of suicide, because they're able to notice that and able to refer them to services where they can get the help they need. And then postvention, this is help for people who have injured themselves or are affected. And it's just that continuum of care of making sure that after that happens, that they don't end up going back down this river again, that we keep them on this other side. We do know that one of the greatest risk factors for suicide is a previous attempt. All right. So how are we using all of this information in the communities around Wyoming? So a little over 2 years ago, the Wyoming legislature basically assigned the Wyoming Department of Health, or challenged us to put funding towards these priority areas of suicide prevention, underage drinking and other drugs, tobacco, and adult binge drinking. This money that we're spending towards all of this, which adds up to $8 million for the biennium, or $4 million per year, is funded through different funding streams. The majority of it is through federal grant money and tobacco settlement funds. And then there's some portion of state general funds that goes towards this as well. And all of this funding is pushed out to, it's offered to all 23 counties, but we only have 22 that participate. And it's pushed out through the county commissioners, and every county looks a little bit different. Some use public health nursing to push this money out into the communities. But the idea is that the community prevention specialist works with coalitions. They develop work plans using the data from their specific county. And we encourage them to work on policy efforts. So whether that be in schools or at work with different employers in their county, to create comprehensive pre and post-vention plans. Crisis response teams, working with law enforcement to have crisis intervention trainings, training the general public, and supporting zero suicide framework in hospitals or medical care facilities in their area. And so that's how we're pushing money out to 22 of the 23 counties. And currently there are 23, this is just a coincidence, 23 evidence-based strategies being initiated. So on average, around 5 per county. So each county has different challenges. Each county has different capacity to address suicide prevention. So we give them the data, we work with them and the coalitions to determine what evidence-based strategies are going to be a best fit for that county versus us just having a blanket approach for the entire state, because we recognize that what works here in Laramie County may not work in Lincoln County. And let's see, next, I just want to briefly talk to you about the National Violent Death Reporting System. Almost 2 years ago, the Wyoming Department of Health joined on to the National Violent Death Reporting System. I believe there were 10 states that were left to be funded, and we were one of those last states to join. The National Violent Death Reporting System collects detailed information from law enforcement reports, death certificates, coroner reports, including toxicology. And at this point in time, all 50 states and Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. are all a part of this. And this is all run through CDC. So since January of 2018, we have been abstracting data for every death, every violent death in the state of Wyoming. So that includes suicide, homicide, and deaths of undetermined intent. And we collect data and put this into the database. We abstract all of these reports, law enforcement, coroner's reports, and put them into a database. We're looking at things like location of injury, characteristics of a victim, relationship of the victim to a suspect, weapons use, toxicology reports, alcohol, substance abuse, relationship issues, problems with a job or finance, all of these different issues. And this is really going to help us in Wyoming. Next year, we'll be able to put out our first state report. We have an advisory board, and at the end, I'll show you my contact info. Please contact me if you're interested in serving on the advisory board. We'd love to have you. But this is going to give us much more meaningful data to inform our prevention efforts at the state level. It's one thing to know that, okay, the majority of deaths are by middle-aged men, middle-aged white men by firearms. If we know that it's tied to problems with jobs or finances, then we can work closer with those employers who are shutting down a business, whether it be a mine or whatever, so that we can get in front of this and work on that upstream prevention that I was talking about a minute ago. As far as resources in our state, we have, I think, a pretty great website where you can go on our website. You can search for the type of resource that you want in your community. You have contact information for every community prevention specialist in every county. We have community mental health centers in every county, and we have several nonprofits around the state doing work in suicide prevention. Of course, I have to mention the fact that until last month, until earlier last month, we were the only state in the country without an in-state suicide prevention call center. And now we have 2 in Wyoming, one in Casper and one in Grable. and they're answering calls from Wyoming to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And that means they can actually refer them now to local resources and cut down on that wait time. And here is my contact information. I only went 2 minutes over. I apologize. Please feel free to reach out to me via email. Go to our website, check out our resources, call me, email me if you need anything, if you have any questions, if you're interested in getting more information, I would be happy to help.
Thank you very much, Miss Lindsay Martin from the Wyoming Department of Health Injury and Violence Prevention Program. Thank you. Next, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Captain Leslie Brazil from the Wyoming Army National Guard. Resiliency and self-care and self-awareness. Miss Brazil, take it away.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Captain Leslie Brazil. I am a member of the Wyoming Army National Guard. However, I'm coming to you today in a civilian capacity because not only am I in the National Guard, but I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, currently working in mental health with kids and adolescents. So just a little bit about me. I am, like I said, a member of the Wyoming Army National Guard. I commissioned as an officer in 2013. From the University of Wyoming. Currently, I'm a field artillery officer post-command. However, I am transitioning to behavioral health to be a part of the medical detachment here in Wyoming. Additionally, I serve as a SHARP victim advocate and have been in that role since 2017. As stated before, I am a licensed clinical social worker. I specialize in suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention efforts with kids, adolescents, and their families. Previously, I was the suicide intervention counselor at Youth Alternatives, and currently I work as a school social worker at Johnson Junior High. I'm also QPR and Assist certified. I also serve as the vice chair for Grace for Two Brothers on the board of directors, and I am a PhD candidate studying marriage and family therapy. So today I'm going to talk to you about 3 things that are really key to the idea of suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. These things are resilience, self-awareness, and self-care. Now, I'm going to be talking in kind of broad terms, and I want us all to really dig deep and learn about these 3 things within ourselves, how it helps us recognize and understand not just risk factors, but protective factors, but then also what it means for those that we serve. So, as I said, I'm standing before you as not only a military officer, but also a civilian provider. And I'm on both sides of the spectrum, as I think a lot of the people in this audience are. So it wouldn't be a military briefing if I didn't list our objectives here. Please take your time to read those. But basically, we're just gonna be understanding, again, the risk factors and protective factors of these three things. Again, this is a sensitive subject, as are all of these topics that we've been talking about today. I encourage you, if at any time that you're triggered throughout this presentation, to please seek help, reach out to somebody that can support you. You can always reach out to me as well. I will provide my contact information at the end. So we're going to begin by discussing the idea of resilience. Of course, I found these definitions from everybody's favorite, Dr. Google. So resilience, according to Webster's dictionary, means the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or having toughness. So again, coming from a military background, we've all been through master resiliency training. It's almost everybody's least favorite mandatory briefing. However, it's by far one of the most important, because when we're standing up and we're leading soldiers or we're leading in the community, knowing the resilience within ourselves and the resilience within others is a vastly important piece to being that preventative measure. So just a little bit of research thrown in there. Leo Scher is a leading researcher on suicide prevention out of Scandinavia, and he states on the importance of resilience in education and prevention that building resilience should be a part of universal, selective, and indicated suicide prevention interventions. Promoting resilience may reduce suicide risk in the general population, in groups that are at elevated risk, and among high-risk individuals. Building resilience within the general population may reduce the incidence of stress-related disorders and, consequently, suicidal behavior. So he's not exactly saying that there's a direct connection between stress and suicide, but he is alluding to a correlation. Another group of researchers, and they look at resilience in more of a business management perspective, is that there are 4 elements to the idea of resilience. And those are confidence, social support, adaptability, and purposefulness. And so when we really reflect inward to ourselves, and maybe you put yourself in a position like, say today, standing up here on this stage, having the confidence, knowing that maybe I fail, maybe I succeed, but having that at the end of the day equals a resilient piece in my mind. Social supports. As a mental health professional, one of the first questions that I always ask my clients are, who do you have for support? And that's not just a one-time question, that's an every-time question. When things are good, who do you turn to? When things are bad, who do you turn to? So who do we all turn to? Who are our supports? Who are our soldiers' supports? What if they don't have the family? How are we fostering that with the people that we lead and the people that we serve and within ourselves? Third is adaptability. A lot of these go without saying, but we all face hardships, we all face struggles. Especially right now, 2020, I think we can all agree that this has been a year of chaos. And with every day, we're faced with new unknowns. And we adapt every single day. But if we lack that piece of adaptability, it takes that stress and that chaos, and it compounds until it becomes oftentimes unbearable. And then finally, purposefulness. I know as a military leader, as a strengths-based leader, we always try and find what it is in the people that we support or the people that we lead that makes them who they are, and giving them that purpose and giving them that sense of satisfaction, and we should celebrate that in them. And I think anybody in this room or on this screen who knows and understands the effects of lack of purpose and what that causes for people who are maybe feeling hopeless in their lives. So having these 4 elements and taking them into consideration within ourselves and within others, we're constantly promoting the idea of resilience. It's a lot more than hunt the good stuff or learn about your iceberg if we're talking in MRT terms, but this is what makes us who we are as human beings day in and day out. I want to really harp on the fact that resilience does not mean that you don't ask for help. By being a resilient person, you don't stand in front of a room and let all of it come on top of you and put on that happy face and think that, oh, I'm okay, I'll just fall apart when I get home. Being able to ask for help is another element of resilience that I believe kind of falls into all 4 of those elements. Being able to accept help means even more, because that's just building on those strengths that we already have. None of us can do everything, and we definitely can't do it alone. So I would invite you to ask yourself the question, how resilient are you? And how does your resilience move and be communicated to those that you help and those that you turn to for support? Second is self-awareness. This is one of my all-time favorite words and topics and things to talk about. As a social worker, I think self-awareness, especially as a clinician, is probably one of the most important factors that I could have as a professional, not only in the work that I do with other people, but the work that I do on myself and knowing kind of my limits. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But again, definition for today that we'll be operating under for self-awareness is the conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires. And again, I'm going to note feelings are in there. A lot of people who know me, especially in the Guard side, always kind of laugh because I try and get people to talk about their feelings, because we don't walk around stoic all day long. That's not who we are. We have emotions and we have feelings, and knowing and understanding and discussing those become a very important piece of self-awareness. Kind of in the idea of self-awareness, again, breaking this down in two different ways, both as a risk factor, lack of self-awareness being a risk factor, high self-awareness as a protective factor, but also what that means as the front line of support for the people that may be turning to us for help. And I want to hit on three key things, and those are biases, differing experiences, and trauma histories. I know as a military officer, as a military audience, a lot of times we dwindle the soldier essence or the airman essence into their performance. But when we're looking at these three things, performance is nowhere in there. And that's something that we just look at as a standard or a measurement to gauge success as a soldier. But nowhere in performance are we talking about success as a human. And so when we, as self-aware leaders, can identify the biases that we might have, maybe it's failing a PT test, that's a bias that you have against a soldier. Automatically they fail. Maybe they're not going to be getting the support and the attention from their leaders that they deserve. So being aware of that and trying to dig underneath of what those soldiers might be going through, because performance can mean a multitude of things. It could just be a lot more than you didn't work out before your PT test. Differing experience is one of my favorite things to talk about and discuss. In a postmodern perspective, if we're talking theoretically in terms of what mental health provides or social services, human services, the idea of differing experiences essentially means that my experience does not equal her experience or his experience. And a lot of times, especially as busy adults that value productivity above all, we think that we can go through the same experience with someone and we see it the same way. But that's not true. I could have a twin sister right here that we go through the same traumatic childhood event, and her level of resilience or her level of awareness is vastly different than mine. But from the outside, you think, well, why can't she handle that? Or why can't you handle that? And so really understanding that those differing experiences make people who they are, that it affects your performance, that it affects your ability to cope, that it affects your resilience, to tie it all back to the beginning, is what we as leaders need to be aware of. And at the same time, we as people who have these experiences and understanding their effects on our own risk factors or protective factors. And then finally, it goes without saying, trauma histories. It's kind of something that I believe now kind of we're becoming a lot more aware of as a society. There's a lot of trauma-focused programs, trauma-informed schools, trauma-informed classrooms. We need trauma-informed leadership. And it's there, but it's at the individual level. And what we want is for it to be an organization that is trauma-informed, because nobody is without trauma. It all comes back to helping build those resilient skills and self-awareness. Again, I wouldn't be me if I wasn't talking about feelings. Self-awareness and emotional expression. There's nothing wrong with saying you're having a bad day. There's nothing wrong with saying that you need help. There's nothing wrong with reaching out for help. Where it becomes wrong is if that person that you're reaching out to turns away, because maybe they aren't in touch with their own feelings or their own emotions. And maybe if someone's crying, they're like, whoa, hold on, I don't do tears. What impact does that have on the person that really needs you at that time? And then finally, self-awareness also means knowing when to walk away. And I hammer this because, as I stated before, as a society that values nothing but productivity and exhaustion as a measure of success, nobody knows when to walk away. Nobody knows when to turn their phones off, or they think maybe they leave work on time, that they're not working as hard as the person next to them. But when you think about the long-term effects, what does that do to you? And what is that modeling to the people below you? If you're saying, hey, take a break, hey, turn your phone off, hey, leave early, but you're not doing that yourself, then it's a little bit hypocritical. And we're going to talk about self-care here in a minute, and I bring it all together because I do see, especially in kind of the combined worlds, that we focus so much on the work that we're doing helping other people or trying to help other people that we're actually not helping them at all because we're not helping ourselves. And we're not taking care of ourselves. And we're not modeling what it means to be a good, healthy, well-balanced person. A lot more than in the physical sense, but in the emotional and the spiritual and psychological sense as well. And finally, everybody's favorite topic, it wouldn't be any sort of conference or symposium if we didn't discuss self-care. But the definition we'll be using today is engaging in activities that promote emotional, physical, and psychological well-being. I want to point out that self-care is a lot more than face masks and massages and pedicures and manicures. That's what our world wants us to think, right? Especially women. How much are we marketed the idea of self-care? But when you think about these two that are up here on the screen, statements that are really often said, I say that to clients all the time, you can't pour from an empty cup and put your oxygen mask on before helping others. And when you really think about what those two statements mean, we're not helping anybody if we have nothing to give. And when we're talking about self-care, I'm not talking about those physical things that make us feel good in the moment, going shopping, drinking a beer at the end of the day, having a good meal, whatever. I'm talking about boundaries, setting boundaries, learning to say no. I'm talking about recognizing toxicity in your life, whether it's relationships, a job, something that doesn't bring you happiness or doesn't bring you joy, or worse, makes you feel bad about yourself. Work-life balance goes without saying. And prioritization. I don't think there's many things in this world that we can do that are so detrimental to our jobs that can't be put off until the next day. When you have fresh eyes, a fresh soul, very rarely is something such an emergency that you have to be putting in 20-hour work days or 80-hour work weeks. I understand there are some professions that do that, but is it healthy? And is it working for the people that are receiving that product, or the consumer or the patient or whatever? Making that prioritization, making your health and your well-being and your emotional state a priority is self-care. And self-care is not selfish. I used to feel bad leaving work early to go home and do nothing. You think, okay, if I'm leaving work early, I better have an appointment or homework or something to do. It's okay to leave work early and go home and do nothing. It's okay to take a deep breath and maybe just sit in silence. Because if we are pouring from an empty cup, especially in the world of suicide prevention, we are helping nobody. We are hurting them. And at the end of the day, if we are somebody's only source of success, we are also their only source of failure. And so by blending all of these three things together, it all comes down to recognizing that within ourselves and how we can use our own awareness and our resilience and our ability to set boundaries to model that to other people and to encourage them to use their vast resources that have been expressed throughout today's symposium. So to kind of wrap up, I just want to kind of end with this statement, because as a military officer, and I stand in front of you now as a military officer, that this is a problem. The fact that soldiers don't want to come to people because they're afraid of what might happen is a problem. And when we talk about ending the stigma, I heard another presenter talk about ending the stigma earlier today. It's a lot more than just saying, oh, I support you. We have to live that we are ending the stigma of mental health and suicide awareness and making it something normal, something that we want to talk about and something that we want to help people through, because we cannot fight wars or battles and win them if we don't have a healthy force to do so. So I end with questions. I will put my contact information up on the screen. If there are any questions that anybody has, please reach out to me. Again, I like this picture because I think we all kind of live that every single day. If you're ready to talk, you better be ready to listen. And that's my last message for you. Again, resources that I know have been talked about earlier today, and then here's all of my information. I believe we can probably get that out somehow.
Thank you, Ms. Captain Leslie Brazil of the Wyoming Army National Guard. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Candy Sneed from Grace for Two Brothers, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Candy, take it away.
I've been a volunteer with Grace for Two Brothers for 4 years now, and I am now in my first year on the staff with Grace for Two Brothers, so that's exciting. I'm also a mom to 4 fantastic kiddos. Yep, I said 4. 3 are grown and on their own, and I still have 1 little munchkin at home. I'm also the youth pastor for St. Mark's Episcopal Church here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So why is that all important? Because all of those hats blend together into one. I have also served in the military. I was in the 101st Airborne Division out of Fort Lee, Virginia. So as a civilian and prior military, I understand how hard it can be to say, hey, I need some help, right? It's incredibly stressful to do that, but it's okay to also do that. So I, like other people around this area, found my way to Grace for Two Brothers because I was searching for something. I needed healing in my life and I didn't know where to get it. I was stuck in a rut of guilt and shame and confusion, not knowing what to do after losing loved ones of my own. Some of these loved ones were family, some of these loved ones I served with, and I didn't know how to handle that. I was just searching for a ray of sunshine somewhere out in that darkness of guilt and shame. And what I found is I was not the only person in that situation. I found other people in that situation also. And through that, it began a healing process. And I was able to take that hurt, that pain, that guilt, that shame, and turn it into something positive. So with that, Grace for Two Brothers is an amazing foundation. It was created by BJ Ayers. And with our foundation, we provide resources and information and assistance to those who are in crisis, and also those who are currently in crisis, and provide support to the caregivers and the survivors of suicide loss. So we're catching people at the beginning of their journey with their self-doubts. We're also helping that family towards the end when they really just can't see through that darkness. So some more stats for you. I know it's a military function, so of course there's going to be more stats. So when we talk about suicide, that's a hard topic to even get into. It's a hard word for some people to even say. It's like back in the 60s and the 70s, nobody said the word cancer. Shh, don't say it. It's a big secret, right? And people treat suicide the same way. Shh, don't say it. Don't let people know. And we're here to break that and shatter that silence that people are suffering in. The most important thing that I can give you on this slide is that Wyoming ranks second in the country for suicide by death, or death by suicide, excuse me. In the time that I'll be talking to you, this brief time that I'll be talking to you today, we would have lost somebody in the United States to suicide. On average, we lose somebody every 12 minutes. I want that to sink in for a second. Every 12 minutes, we lose somebody's father, mother, uncle, sister, cousin, coworker, soldier, friend, neighbor, child. We're going to lose somebody. So that's why organizations like ours are here to help with that stigma and help end that trend. So with Grace for Two Brothers, we can offer several things to our community, besides just resources and a friendly hug and a smile to let you know that you're not alone. We offer QPR training, which is similar to the ACE training that you're acquainted with, ASSIST training, but more importantly, we have our Hour of Grace support group, our lived experience peer support group, and our crisis calls for prevention and postvention. The important thing about that is we try to help people, again, before their attempts, to help them through that process. But in the event that that does happen, because we can't save everybody, we can try, but we just can't. And that's where we all come in, and that's where training is so important. Because I'm not going to run into the same people that you're going to, and you're not going to run into the same people that I do. But if we're all have an idea, we all have this training with us, we all might be able to reach that person in need. And that's why it's so important. So with that postvention, we have a team lovingly called the Loss Team, who actually will go out and be with a family within 72 hours after a loss. And we do that in partnership with the Laramie County Coroner's Office. So there is always somebody there with you. So you don't have to go through that path in the darkness like our family had to. It was a horrible feeling that we now can help other people through. And a lot of what we do at Grace for Two Brothers is peer support. I lived through this experience. This is what I wish I would have had. Let me help you through this also. So QPR, similar to your ACE training, is question, persuade, refer. It's the #1 training that we do most frequently at Grace for Two Brothers. We will go to high schools, we will go to businesses, we will get a group of friends together just to do this training if necessary. Recognizing the signs of suicide is very important, and I know we've touched on that topic today, but we're going to go over it one more time. Depression doesn't equal suicide, but depression can equal suicide. Not everybody that's depressed will be suicidal, and not everybody that's suicidal will show depression. But understanding the signs and warning signs and the symptoms of what's going on is crucial to helping that person get the help that they need. So with QPR, we will recognize the warning signs and learn how to ask the question. Think about that. Have you ever had to ask a loved one or a friend, are you thinking of ending your life by suicide? That's a really hard question to ask. It's even harder if you're connected with that person. So through these trainings, we help guide you in learning how to ask those questions, how to get them to the help that they need. So what does that mean for our community? Well, if we specifically talk about our youth, we have tons of resources here that is available on this slide, but also will be made available to you and on our website as well, which we will give you that information towards the end. Our youth are at risk, and if our youth are at risk and they make it through their teenage years, do you think they'll be stable adults? Probably not. The traumas that they suffer as youth will carry through to their adulthood. And that's when it becomes more dangerous, because you're just piling more on, right? And what happens if you just keep piling it on? It's going to compress. Eventually they're going to explode, and they're going to do something dangerous. People are not wired to hurt themselves. Have you ever seen that toddler stomp up and say, if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to hold my breath and I'm just going to pass out. I'm going to hold my breath till I die. Give me what I want. You know what, honey? You go ahead and hold your breath, because your body is going to pass out, you're going to fall to the floor, and you're going to start breathing again, because our bodies are not wired to harm ourselves. But every once in a while, something happens to those brain chemicals up there, right? When our brain doesn't develop properly, sometimes those chemicals don't fire like they're supposed to. And that allows us to harm ourselves. So we want to start to recognize that with our youth, because during the PNA survey, which is the Prevention Needs Assessment, we learned that 51% of Wyoming junior high and senior high female students reported that they had considered suicide in the past year. All of our stats are from 2018. We always put our statistics 2 years behind to give families time to grieve and to heal. With that statistic, which this one hurts my heart so bad because I have a child at home this age, 19% of sixth graders. That's 11, 12, 13-year-olds. 19% of sixth graders reported that they had considered suicide within the past year. 83, I am not quoting that incorrectly, 83% of our Wyoming junior high and high school male students have reported that they have considered suicide in the past year. 83. I mean, we're Wyoming, right? We're tough. We're cowboys. We're military families. We're strong. We don't have to show emotions. We don't talk about emotions. And that's the signal we're trying to end. So by talking about it, we can raise awareness and provide resources to our youth to help them through this. Two of the most important ones I want to highlight. First is our crisis text line, which is you just text WYO, W-Y-O, to 741-741, and you get a counselor to text back with you. So I don't know if you know anything, but teenagers are stuck like this. And I can't say much about that because I am also on my phone a lot. The next one that's really important for families is Safe to Tell Wyoming. We flood these schools with Safe to Tell material. We have bracelets and we have magnets and we have brochures because we want the students to know that there is a way that they can reach out. A lot of times as a student, you don't want to reach out because you're from a tough family. You're an important family. You can't talk to somebody about this. And what we're trying to communicate to the community is that you can. There we go. Sorry about that. So as you just heard before, adults have feelings too. Those feelings don't end when we grow up. We assume that during the terrible twos, they're going to be emotional. And those preteens, their emotions are just all over the charts. 3 daughters they're all within a year of each other. That can get pretty risky. But adults have those feelings too. We just have learned how to manage with them. But when those feelings get to be so much and your bucket is overfilled, that's when it's time to let some things go and reach out for help. So with our adults here, The thing I want to highlight the most is that adults have trouble reaching out. We're supposed to be strong, we're supposed to be in control. I always thought when I was younger, and I remember a favorite aunt of mine was in her 30s, and I was like, wow, she's got her life together. That's when it happens, in your 30s. That's when you get your life together and you understand what's going on, right? No, that's not right. I don't think you ever really figure it fully out. And that's okay too. It's important to reach out because these numbers that are going on in our world are just too high and not acceptable. Now, the thing I want to point out on this is that firearms, and I'm just going to highlight on that one just for a second. Oh, I am not good with a clicky. Our gun lock project. So here in Laramie County, we have 28 locations that we distribute gun locks to, and then there are some more other ones. They include our emergency departments, which we just checked in with them today, police stations, pawn shops, churches, anywhere that they sell firearms, public offices, they're available. They're even available at our office, right outside our door, whether we're there or not. If you know someone that needs one, please make sure that they're provided. Lock them up. Because we know that over 50% of suicides in the United States, over 50% are by a firearm. I mean, let's face it, it's Wyoming, right? Who doesn't have I have weapons in my own home. I have a gun in my own home. But the ammunition is locked up in one space, the gun is locked up in another, and this is what we're trying to teach our families. So adult resources, do you notice something similar here? Some of these resources are the same. They're not just for our youth. That crisis text line, you can text that if you're depressed, you're having a chemical addiction, you're feeling overwhelmed that day, you have a gambling problem, you're sitting there wondering and contemplating life. This number is available to you 24/7. Also, our National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available, as well as the Trevor Project. There is help available, and it's there for you for free. So specifically for our military and first responders, we're military, right? We're tough. Well, we don't need help, do we? Or we just sit in silence and suffer. We need to break that silence. So if you are hurting, or you know somebody who is struggling and having these thoughts of suicide, of loneliness, of hurting yourself, please, please reach out. Just because you're in the military does not mean that you are a superhuman. You are not a superhero. You can do superhero things, but even soldiers need help. That's why we're not by ourselves, right? Everybody has their battle buddy. Everybody has that one person on their six, always willing and able to help. And there are resources to help you. They are at your six all the time. Now for our first responders, these ones are specifically for our officers because they, again, we can't see them as weak, right? So our military police officers, I know that's not the proper term, but we'll just say that for everybody else watching. Those resources are also available to you too. So please use them. We will make them available to you. They are also available on the Grace for Two Brothers website. If you are needing to get a hold of us because you want a training, because you want to know about the peer support groups, because you want to know where you can get help, and you don't want to sit on a website and scroll through it, please give our office a call, leave a message. We will return those messages and make sure that you get connected with the people that can help. See, our purpose here at Grace for Two Brothers isn't just helping to educate, but it's helping to save those lives and it's helping to be a resource for our community. Our community doesn't stop where those military gates go up. See, we're called to help our neighbors, to love our neighbors, to be a good human. And to do that, we have to be able to notice when people are in need of help. So please reach out. You can also find our social media tags there, shameless tags. We're always looking for volunteers. And a lot of times our volunteers have come to say, hey, I'm just here to volunteer. But these resources are available for them too. And sometimes you just need somebody to reach out and understand that this is tough. I don't know how to ask for help. Let me help you. Let me direct you to the agency that can help you the most. So help is available. We really do need to shatter that silence. We need people to feel more confident to step out. And if it takes a magnet sitting on your refrigerator to remind you of the text line, or steps of grace to let you know how to help somebody, whether you need resources about firearms or you need help speaking with your children, we have those resources available and for you. We also have gun locks. They are free. You may have as many as you need. Just please make sure that they remain free within our community for those who need them. All of these resources are available in our office. You can contact us through our website. And if you want additional resources, you can peruse through our website to find out how do I get help with these items. All of these numbers are available there as well. So I just want to thank you all for inviting us here. We are so happy to be working with all of you.
Thank you, Ms. Candy Sneed from the Grace for Two Brothers, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jeremy Bay, the Risk Reduction Coordinator for Magellan Federal, the Wyoming Army National Guard. The risks, the setbacks, and the safety plan. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, everybody. So I've been given the dubious distinction of bringing this thing home. We've had 4 hours of speakers. We've had 8 hours of speakers. And I don't know how to top all that. So what I want to do is I want to talk about safe plans a little bit. I want to talk about calm training a little bit and lethal means. And I want to talk about what happens after somebody gets safe. And then I'll express some gratitude, well, because gratitude is part of appreciating yourself and appreciating others. So, common thread we talked about today was mindfulness, right? So mindfulness. Let's not worry too much about what's going on in the future. Let's not worry about tomorrow. Let's just worry about taking one step in front of the other right now, okay, to get us through. Conflict resolution, okay? If you're constantly at odds with somebody or at odds with yourself, how can you be okay? You know, how can you, you know, Linda talked about your bucket being, or your brain being full of all this stuff, right? If you don't resolve that conflict and it keeps building up and building up and building up, you can't be resilient and you can't be okay. Okay, so take that to heart. Let's talk about lethal means for a second. I want to kind of fill the gaps in a little bit on this, all right? So as those of you who have heard me speak, have heard me say before, and you will hear me say it again, depending on what source you cite, Wyoming is either first or second in suicide deaths per 100,000 people. What you probably haven't heard me say is that 70% of those deaths are due to firearms, all right? So what I'm going to urge you to do is, if you're a person that's struggling, now, later, reach out to someone you trust. Ask them to take the firearms out of your home until you're okay. All right? Those of you who are helping, if someone is not ready to step forward and ask for help, build that into a safe plan. Hey, I understand that you have guns in your house. Can we work out a plan together to remove those, to keep you safe? All right? When we talk about gun locks, Candy just talked about gun locks. Why do we have those? Why do those exist? They exist to give more time to think about the decision. They exist to give emergency responders more time to get to the person in need. They exist to give pause. Okay, when we talk about safe plans, I know people, many of the presenters know people, they hang a safe plan on their gun safe. Okay, just to give them pause, to say, what am I doing? What am I thinking about? All right? Also, when we talk about lethal means, people who attempt with lethal means, 90% of those are completed. Okay? You saw a lot of iceberg slides today. Tip that iceberg upside down when we're talking about lethal means suicide, okay? The top half of that is a lot bigger than the bottom half. 90% of those who choose to take their own life with a firearm are successful. 10% of those who choose to use pills or other methods are not successful. Okay, and let me rephrase that. Successful is not the word I want to use. Complete, all right? People who use firearms complete suicide. So keep that in mind, have the courage. And along those lines, what I want everybody to do right now, and it's going to seem a little silly because you're probably sitting at home or in your office by yourself, I want you to turn to somebody that's sitting next to you, or just say it out into the universe. Are you thinking about suicide? And I want you to really say those words. Are you thinking about suicide? Okay, we talked about it a lot today. This is an uncomfortable topic. People don't like to talk about it. But if you can't talk about it, how can you help someone? How can you intervene? How many lives do you think, we talked about 48,000? 334 people that took their lives from suicide. How many of those lives could have been saved if someone would have stepped forward and said, are you thinking about suicide? Can I help you? Okay, so think about that. Say it out loud, practice it. All right? Understand your boundaries. That's a thing that we talked about a lot today too when we talk about helping people. Understand your own limits. Understand your limitations. Understand what you can and can't do. If you're a person who struggles with trauma, do you think it's a good idea for you to be a helper to someone that's experiencing trauma? No, understand your limits. We all get big hearts. People in this field have big hearts, and we want to save everybody. But a lot of times what happens is we step out and we hurt ourselves because we don't understand our limits. Okay? Now, I'm not telling you just to abandon the person that needs help. Okay? But understand your limits. Set the boundary and do a warm handoff to somebody that can help. Okay, that's somebody that's more equipped to help. All right? There are people that are professionals, PhDs, doctors, MDs. Okay, they will do that. If they don't feel like they can help, they will hand off to somebody who can. Okay, don't do more harm than good. We talked about PTSD. All right, does anybody know what PTSD looks like? What causes PTSD? What if I told you that after 21, almost 22 years in the Navy, I'd never been in combat, but I had PTSD? Would you believe me? Okay, I do. What if I told you that every time a helicopter flies over me, I get a little antsy? Okay, I was part of a pretty bad helicopter crash on the back of a ship several years ago. There's a lot that goes on with that. Okay, so why do I tell you this? Just like we say depression doesn't have a face, neither does PTSD. And everybody kind of deals with it different. Everybody's got their own trauma and their own post-traumatic stress. Also, it doesn't have to be related to combat. You know, there's a huge spectrum of trauma out there that people experience, and they have trouble coping with it. So please recognize that and recognize it's important. Don't get into the habit of dismissing people's trauma because it's not as important as you think it should be. Okay? It doesn't matter what we think as helpers. It matters what the person who's dealing with the trauma thinks. Okay? So keep that in mind. So let's talk real quick about a safety plan, all right? We've all been through ACE, a lot of us have been through ASSIST. So what does that look like? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to cure all their problems? Are we trying to make them better by waving our magic, I have a pen, so it's a magic pen. No, we're not, okay? We're trying to keep them safe for now, right? We're trying to keep them safe until 11:52, okay? We want to keep them safe for now, and that's what we're trying to do, all right? So we're going to engage them, right? That's why I want everybody to stand up and say, are you having thoughts of suicide? Okay, and I'm very specific when I say thoughts of suicide. Why? Because we talk about suicide being a wide range of thoughts and behaviors, right? If I say, are you thinking about killing yourself? Your answer may be no. But if I said, are you having thoughts of suicide? That's a different conversation. And we can get you at the top of that river that Lindsay Martin talked about, right? Instead of all the way down here where you're already in crisis, okay? So ask them, are you thinking about suicide? Then let's get in there and listen to what they're telling us. Listen to their story. You know, and this is stuff we talk about in ACE, ASSIST, QPR, okay? Listen, care. You have to care. You have to be empathetic in these situations. And again, please do not be dismissive of what they are telling you. A lot of people have heard this story. Brianna Brand has heard this story 20 times about the Muffin Man. I will tell it again. There was a gentleman who was thinking about taking his own life. And when they sat down to talk to him, they said, why do you, what is it that makes you want to live? And this gentleman made the best muffins in the town. And his link to life was, if I'm no longer here, who is going to make the muffins for my community that everybody loves so much? Not a big deal to a lot of us, right? Hey, the muffins, they're just muffins. Somebody else will get it, right? Right, but to that guy that's making them, those muffins are everything. And that's his link to life, so please do not be dismissive of that, okay? These little things are important, okay? And then, you know, when we talk about ACE, we talk about escort, okay? We want to get them to somebody that can keep them safe. Those that are CIS trained, we want to build a safety plan, right? Hey, do you have pills in the house? Do you have lethal means in the house? Can I help you get rid of those? Is there somebody we can contact that you feel like talking to, all right? It's not always us. Sometimes it's Coach Bob from my high school swim team that I feel most comfortable talking to. So our responsibility is to link them with that person that they can have that conversation with. Don't leave them alone, okay? But maybe we're not the ones. Maybe we're not the ones they want to talk to. But don't leave them out there with nothing, okay? So what I'm saying is, let's get them safe and let's get them to the healthcare providers so they can help them, all right? We're not there to solve all of their crises. So to kind of wrap this up, I want to talk about gratitude and I want to talk about asking for help. You know, we talked about you can't do it on your own because you're not going to be successful, all right? So the first thing I wanted to show gratitude for is that Leslie is helping my term Dr. Google to go viral, so I appreciate that. I hope it catches on. I hope everyone starts calling it Dr. Google. The other thing I want to talk about is everyone that participated today has a dog in the fight of making not only the Wyoming Army National Guard a suicide safer community, but the community at large suicide safer. And by locking arms and joining forces and taking a step forward together, we are far more powerful and effective than if we try to do it individually. Every organization has strengths. Every organization has values. But if we sit on an island and try to solve all the problems ourselves, we're not going to be successful. There's overlap that needs to happen to catch all these folks. You know, you folks in the Army National Guard, you fall into a very unique category, is that you live in two worlds most of the time, most of you. I understand there's exceptions of AGRs and ADOS. Most of the time you fall into two worlds. You're kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So where do you go to help? Or for help, right? That's why we're providing these resources, so you know where to go for help, all right? Give us a call. Don't be afraid to call a hotline. Don't be afraid to call any of these people you saw today, okay? Even if they can't help you, they will get you to somebody who can. They'll get you to the right people. You know, we talk about lines of effort and lines of funding and stuff, okay? That's true. But again, if you call one of us and you say you need help, we're not gonna be like, sorry, we're not paid to do that, okay? We're gonna make sure we get you to the right people to take care of you. So I wanna extend gratitude to everybody who stepped up today to participate in this thing. All the speakers, some of who are still here, some of who are left, hopefully they're watching. I also want to extend gratitude to Sergeant Jackie Marshall and her team. We could not have done, like literally, we could not have done this without you. I would have been standing here with a busted screen Galaxy Note trying to film these people and put them on Facebook. You guys have upped the production value and made this super great, so I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate everybody out there who's watching. You're trying to jump into the, you're jumping in the community to help us make this a suicide safer community. And we really appreciate it. This was our first time. We'll have some lessons learned and try to make it better next time. But again, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy Bay, and thank you for attending the Wyoming Military Department Suicide Prevention Symposium, September 2020. This is a reminder that suicide is not an option. Be there to assist, be there to care, be there to escort, and be the shield and sword for the Wyoming National Guard. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service.